Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true police horror stories that will make you question what law enforcement officers really encounter when they respond to calls in the dead of night. These are not fictional tales, but real incidents documented in police reports, witness testimonies, and official records that never made it into mainstream news. Each story has been meticulously compiled from verified sources, including department archives, court documents, and first-hand accounts from officers who lived through experiences that shattered their understanding of reality. Police work exposes individuals to the darkest corners of human existence. But some cases transcend explanation, leaving even seasoned detectives grasping for answers that logic cannot provide. If you enjoy authentic horror content that bridges the gap between true crime and the unexplained, subscribe to Buried Files and hit the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into cases that blur the line between criminal activity and the supernatural. After you listen to these harrowing accounts, we want to hear from you in the comments below about whether you believe some incidents defy rational explanation, or if there is always a logical answer waiting to be discovered. Now settle in as we examine 7 cases that pushed law enforcement officers to their absolute breaking point and left permanent scars on those who dared to investigate the darkness. Officer Carter had been working the graveyard shift for 3 years, and in that time, he had responded to hundreds of domestic disturbance calls. Most of them followed the same predictable pattern. Neighbors would report shouting or the sound of breaking glass. He would arrive at the scene, separate the arguing parties, take statements, and either make an arrest or leave after tensions cooled. It was routine work that rarely surprised him anymore. But the call that came through dispatch at 2:47 a.m. on a freezing February morning would shatter every assumption Carter had about what was possible in his line of work. The address was 4738 Millbrook Road, an isolated farmhouse about 20 minutes outside of town. The dispatcher relayed that a woman had called 911, reporting that someone was trying to break into her home. She said her husband was away on business and that she was alone with her 2 children. The call had been frantic, the woman's voice high and trembling. Then the line went dead. Dispatch tried calling back multiple times, but no one answered. Carter confirmed he was en route and pushed his patrol car faster along the dark country roads. When he arrived at the property, everything looked wrong from the start. The long gravel driveway led to a 2-story white farmhouse surrounded by empty fields. Every single light in the house was blazing bright, illuminating the barren yard and casting long shadows across the frost-covered grass. The front door stood wide open despite the sub-freezing temperature. A family sedan sat in the driveway, its hood cold to the touch. Carter approached slowly, his hand resting on his service weapon as he called out to announce his presence. No one answered. He stepped through the open doorway into the living room and immediately felt the warmth of the heating system running at full blast. The television was on, playing a late-night infomercial with the volume turned low. Children's toys were scattered across the carpet in the middle of what appeared to be an interrupted playtime. A pink stuffed rabbit lay face down near the couch. Building blocks formed a half-finished tower. A child's drawing sat on the coffee table, the crayons still scattered beside it, as though the young artist had been called away suddenly. Carter called out again, identifying himself as police. The house remained silent, except for the low hum of the television and the forced air heating. He moved through the living room into the kitchen and found a scene that made his skin crawl. The kitchen table was set for dinner with 4 place settings. 3 plates still held food, a casserole of some kind with green beans and dinner rolls on the side. The food was still warm, steam rising faintly from one of the plates. Glasses of milk sat beside each plate, barely touched. A fourth chair had been knocked over backward and lay on the floor. The phone hung off the wall mount, the handset dangling by its cord and swaying slightly. Carter picked up the receiver and heard only a dial tone. This was the phone the 911 call had come from. Carter's training told him to clear the house room by room, to ensure there was no immediate threat before investigating further. He moved through the first floor, checking the bathroom, a small office, and a laundry room. All empty. All showing signs of recent occupation, but no people. In the office, a computer was still running, its screen displaying a paused video game. In the laundry room, the washing machine had completed its cycle, the wet clothes sitting inside, waiting to be transferred to the dryer. Upstairs, he found 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom had an unmade bed and clothes laid out on the comforter as though someone had been deciding what to wear. The 2 smaller bedrooms clearly belonged to children, a boy and a girl based on the decorations. Both rooms were neat, beds made, everything in order. Carter returned downstairs and stood in the kitchen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A family had been here less than an hour ago. They had been eating dinner. The children had been playing. Then something had happened that caused them to leave so suddenly they did not even turn off the lights or close the front door. But their car was still here. The temperatures outside were well below freezing. Where could they have gone on foot? And why? That was when Carter noticed the basement door. It was located off the kitchen, partially hidden behind a pantry cabinet. The door was slightly ajar, just a few inches, enough to reveal darkness beyond. Carter had not checked the basement yet. He approached the door slowly and pulled it fully open. A wooden staircase descended into blackness. The light switch was on the wall at the top of the stairs. But when Carter flipped it, nothing happened. The basement lights were out, either switched off from below or the bulbs were dead. He retrieved his flashlight from his duty belt and shone it down the stairs. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing concrete steps leading down to a cement floor. Carter descended slowly, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. The wooden stairs creaked under his boots. The air grew colder as he went down, noticeably colder than the heated house above. His flashlight beam swept across the basement as he reached the bottom step. It was a large, unfinished space with concrete walls and exposed wooden beams across the ceiling. Storage boxes were stacked along one wall. An old furnace stood in the corner, connected to ductwork that branched across the ceiling. A washer and dryer sat against another wall, older models that appeared to be backups for the newer set upstairs. Everything looked normal for a farmhouse basement. Then Carter heard it. A faint scraping sound, like something being dragged across concrete. It came from the far corner of the basement, beyond the reach of his flashlight. He called out, identifying himself again as police, ordering anyone present to show themselves. The scraping stopped. Silence filled the basement, thick and oppressive. Carter moved forward, sweeping his light across the space. The beam landed on the far corner and he saw it. A section of the concrete wall had been removed, not broken or damaged, but carefully taken apart brick by brick. Behind the wall was a dark opening, a tunnel that led deeper into the earth beneath the house. The tunnel was roughly 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, clearly hand-dug through dirt and clay. Wooden supports had been installed along the sides and top, preventing collapse. The scraping sound came from somewhere inside that tunnel. Carter felt every instinct in his body screaming at him to call for backup, to get out of this basement and wait for other officers to arrive. But the 911 call had mentioned children. If there was any chance those kids were down here, he could not wait. He crouched down and entered the tunnel, his flashlight held in one hand and his other hand on his weapon. The tunnel extended about 15 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Carter emerged into a dugout room approximately 10 feet by 10 feet with the same wooden supports holding back the earthen walls. The ceiling was just tall enough for him to stand if he hunched slightly. What he saw in that chamber would stay with him every single day for the rest of his life. The room had been furnished like a living space. There was a cot with blankets. A small battery-powered lantern sat on an overturned crate that served as a table. Empty food containers were stacked in one corner. But what drew Carter's attention was the wall opposite the entrance. It was covered in photographs, hundreds of them, tacked to the wooden support beams. They were surveillance photos of the family who lived in the house above. Photos of the mother taking out trash, photos of the children playing in the yard, photos taken through windows showing the family eating dinner, watching television, sleeping in their beds. Some of the photos were dated, going back over 2 years. In the center of the photograph wall was a large hand-drawn map of the house's interior, every room labeled with notes about the family's daily routines. What time they woke up, when the children went to school, when the mother was home alone, the father's business trip schedule. Everything about their lives had been documented with obsessive detail. Beside the map were lists written in cramped handwriting, titled with dates. Each list described what the family had done that day, what they had eaten, what they had worn, conversations that had been overheard. Carter realized with horror that someone had been living under this house for years, watching this family, documenting every aspect of their lives. The tunnel had been dug from somewhere else, probably an access point far from the house, and had been expanded over a long period of time. Whoever had created this had been patient, methodical, and completely undetected until tonight. But where was that person now? And where was the family? He heard the scraping sound again, closer this time, coming from behind him. Carter spun around, and his flashlight beam caught movement in the tunnel entrance. A figure was crawling through, moving toward him. In the confined space and poor lighting, Carter could not make out details, only a human shape blocking his only exit. He drew his weapon and shouted commands to stop and show hands. The figure kept coming, faster now, scrambling forward on hands and knees. Carter made a split-second decision. He could not fire in this confined space without knowing who he was shooting at. It could be one of the family members. He moved to the side as much as the cramped chamber allowed and aimed his flashlight directly at the approaching figure. The beam illuminated a man's face, wild-eyed and dirt-covered, mouth open in a silent grimace. The man lunged forward, and Carter had no choice. He fired twice. The sound was deafening in the underground chamber, his ears ringing as the figure collapsed in the tunnel entrance. Carter immediately called for backup on his radio, surprised that he still had reception this far underground. He kept his weapon trained on the figure while he waited, watching for any movement. The man was clearly dead. Carter's shots had been accurate at close range. Within minutes, that felt like hours, he heard voices above in the basement, other officers arriving on scene. They called down to him, and he shouted back his location. Soon, the small chamber was filled with officers, crime scene investigators, and emergency personnel. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the horror. The man Carter had shot was identified as a drifter with a history of stalking and breaking and entering charges in 3 other states. He had apparently selected the farmhouse because of its isolated location and had spent nearly 3 years creating the tunnel system and underground room. The tunnel entrance was located nearly 200 yards from the house, hidden in a drainage culvert on the property. He had been entering the house regularly when the family was away, stealing small items, moving things around, accessing their computer and phone records. But what had happened on the night of the 911 call remained a mystery that haunted Carter more than anything else he had discovered. The family was never found. Not in the tunnels, not on the property, not anywhere in the surrounding area despite extensive searches involving dozens of officers and volunteer searchers. Their car was still in the driveway. Their phones and wallets were still in the house. No bodies were ever recovered. It was as if they had simply vanished from their kitchen table in the middle of dinner. The prevailing theory was that the stalker had somehow taken them, perhaps having help from an accomplice who had not been identified. But there was no evidence of additional people involved. No footprints besides those of the family and the stalker. No tire tracks from another vehicle. The mother's 911 call had reported someone trying to break in, but there was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. The front door had been opened from inside, not broken. Whatever had happened in those final minutes before Carter arrived remained unexplained. Carter stayed on the force for 2 more years after that night, but the incident changed him fundamentally. He had nightmares about the underground room, about the photographs covering the wall, about the stalker's face in his flashlight beam. But worse than any of that was the knowledge that he had been too late. If he had arrived 10 minutes earlier, 5 minutes earlier, he might have saved that family. 3 people had vanished, 2 of them children, and despite his best efforts, he had failed to protect them. He thought about them constantly. He visited the farmhouse multiple times during the investigation, walking through rooms that still held that family's possessions, frozen in time from the night they disappeared. He attended press conferences where the mother's relatives pleaded for information. He searched databases for any sign that the missing family members had been found, hoping for closure that never came. The case remained open, technically, but with no new leads and no evidence of what had actually happened. It grew cold. Eventually, Carter requested a transfer to a desk position, unable to continue patrol work without thinking about that night every time he responded to a call. He completed his required years for pension and retired early, moving to another state where he could try to build a life that was not overshadowed by the memory of what he had found beneath that farmhouse. But he never truly escaped it. The case file still sat in an evidence room somewhere, gathering dust alongside hundreds of other unsolved mysteries. And somewhere, the truth about what happened to that family remained hidden, known only to whatever force had taken them from their home on that frozen February night. Detective Thompson had worked the night shift for 8 years, and he thought he had seen every type of domestic violence case that existed. He had responded to apartments where couples screamed at each other over money. He had arrested men who put their hands on their partners in drunken rage. He had comforted children who cowered in closets while their parents destroyed the home around them. It was the worst part of the job. But Thompson had developed a thick skin and a methodical approach to handling these situations. De-escalate, separate, document, arrest if necessary. The system was not perfect, but it usually worked to stop the immediate violence and give victims a chance to escape dangerous situations. What Thompson did not expect was to respond to a call where the violence had nothing to do with the relationship between the people involved and everything to do with something neither of them could control. The call came in at 11:43 p.m. on a Wednesday night. A frantic woman reported hearing screaming from the apartment next to hers, apartment 4B, in a low-income housing complex on the east side of town. The woman said she had heard a man and woman arguing loudly for about 10 minutes. Then the argument had turned to screaming. Then she heard sounds of a struggle and something breaking. She had called 911 immediately. Thompson and his partner, Officer Rodriguez, were only a few blocks away when the call came through. They arrived at the complex within 4 minutes. The apartment building was a 3-story structure that had seen better days. Peeling paint, cracked concrete steps, dim lighting in the hallways. Thompson and Rodriguez entered through the main door and climbed the stairs to the second floor. As they approached apartment 4B, they could see a small crowd had gathered in the hallway. 3 neighbors stood outside their own apartments, drawn by the commotion. An older woman in a bathrobe was pounding on the door of 4B with her fist, shouting for whoever was inside to open up. This was the woman who had made the 911 call. Thompson asked her to step back and approach the door himself. He knocked firmly and identified himself as police, ordering anyone inside to open the door. For a moment there was silence. Then he heard it. A low moaning sound, distinctly male, coming from inside the apartment. It was a sound of pain, desperate and weakening. Thompson knocked again, louder this time, repeating his commands. No response except for that terrible moaning. He looked at Rodriguez, and they both understood what had to happen. Someone inside was injured and needed immediate help. They had grounds to make entry. Rodriguez retrieved the battering ram from their patrol car, while Thompson continued to announce their presence. The neighbors watched with wide eyes as the 2 officers positioned themselves at the door. On the count of 3, Rodriguez swung the ram, and the door burst inward, the frame splintering around the lock. Thompson entered first, his hand on his weapon but not drawn, scanning the apartment for threats. What he saw in the small living room made him freeze for a split second before his training kicked in. A man lay on the floor in the center of the room, on his back, not moving. Blood pooled around his head, spreading across the worn carpet. Standing over him was a woman, maybe 30 years old, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt now splattered with red. Her hands were at her sides, shaking violently. Her eyes were fixed on the man on the floor, wide with shock. Between the woman and the door where Thompson stood was an overturned coffee table and the shattered remains of what had been a lamp. The scene told a clear story of a physical altercation that had turned deadly. Thompson immediately called for emergency medical services, while Rodriguez moved to secure the woman, gently taking her by the arm and guiding her away from the body. The woman did not resist. She moved mechanically, as though in a trance, allowing herself to be led to the far corner of the room. Thompson knelt beside the man and checked for a pulse. It was there, weak and irregular, but present. The man was still alive. The head wound was severe, blood still flowing from a gash above his right temple. Thompson applied pressure with his hand while waiting for the paramedics, knowing that every second counted. Rodriguez asked the woman what had happened. At first, she did not respond, just stared at the injured man with that same shocked expression. Rodriguez repeated the question more firmly. The woman finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She said the man's name was Marcus. They did not know each other. He had knocked on her door 20 minutes ago, asking to use her phone because his car had broken down outside. She had let him in. They had been standing in the kitchen while he made his call. Then something had happened. Something had come over him. His whole body had gone rigid, his eyes had rolled back, and he had started speaking in a voice that was not his own. Thompson glanced up from the injured man, confused by this statement. Rodriguez asked her to clarify what she meant. The woman said that Marcus had turned toward her with his eyes still rolled back, showing only whites, and had started saying things in a deep, rasping voice. He said that she needed to die, that she was chosen, that it would be quick. Then he had lunged at her, hands reaching for her throat. She had run into the living room trying to get to the door. He had caught her and they had struggled. She had grabbed the lamp from the table and swung it at him, hitting him in the head. He had fallen and hit his head again on the corner of the coffee table as he went down. That was the last thing she remembered before the police arrived. Thompson and Rodriguez exchanged looks. The The woman's story sounded like an obvious attempt to justify what had been a violent confrontation, claiming that the man had attacked her unprovoked and that she acted in self-defense. But there were problems with that narrative. First, if Marcus had truly attacked her with intent to kill, there should be marks on her throat or other signs of assault. Thompson could see from across the room that the woman's neck was unmarked. Second, neighbors had reported hearing an argument before the violence escalated. If Marcus had suddenly been possessed or had a seizure as the woman claimed, there would not have been time for an extended argument. Something about her story did not add up. The paramedics arrived and took over treatment of Marcus. They loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him out of the apartment, heading for the nearest trauma center. Thompson knew the head injury was serious enough that Marcus might not survive. And if he died, this scene would become a homicide investigation. He needed to secure evidence and get a clear statement from the woman before anything was disturbed further. He informed her that she was being detained for questioning and read her rights. She nodded numbly, still in that same shocked state. Rodriguez began photographing the scene while Thompson interviewed the neighbors who had gathered. The older woman who had called 911 said she had heard the man and woman arguing loudly about money. The man had been accusing the woman of stealing from him. The woman had denied it and told him to leave. The argument had escalated from there, getting louder and more aggressive, until there were sounds of furniture breaking and then silence followed by that awful moaning. Another neighbor corroborated this timeline, saying the argument had lasted at least 10 minutes before turning physical. This directly contradicted the woman's claim that Marcus had attacked her suddenly without warning. Thompson returned to the woman and confronted her with these witness statements. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then tears began streaming down her face, and she changed her story. She admitted that she and Marcus did know each other. They had been involved in a drug transaction earlier that day. Marcus claimed she had shorted him on the payment. He had shown up at her apartment demanding the rest of the money. She did not have it. The argument had turned violent when he grabbed her and shoved her against the wall. She had fought back, grabbing the lamp and hitting him harder than she intended. Everything after that was true. He had fallen and hit his head on the table. She had panicked and made up the story about him attacking her unprovoked because she was afraid of being arrested for assault. This new version of events made more sense given the witness statements. But Thompson still felt something was off about the whole situation. He asked the woman to sit on the couch while Rodriguez continued documenting the scene. As Thompson walked around the apartment looking for anything that might provide additional context, he noticed something strange. On the kitchen counter was Marcus's phone, still unlocked and showing his recent calls. Thompson picked it up and scrolled through. The last call Marcus had made was to someone listed as Mom in his contacts. The call had lasted less than a minute and had been placed at 11:29 p.m., about 14 minutes before the 911 call. Thompson played the voicemail that Marcus's mother had left, calling him back. Her message was frantic. She said she had just received a strange call from Marcus, where he had not sounded like himself. His voice had been different, deeper, and he had said disturbing things that made no sense. She begged him to call her back and tell her he was okay. Thompson felt a chill run down his spine. He checked the timestamp on the voicemail. It had been left at 11:31 p.m., 2 minutes after Marcus had called his mother and at least 10 minutes before the violent confrontation, according to witness statements. But the woman had said Marcus made a phone call after arriving at her apartment, which would have been around 11:25 p.m. based on her timeline. If Marcus had called his mother at 11:29 p.m. and his mother immediately noticed something was wrong with his voice, that meant something had changed in Marcus during those few minutes he was in the apartment, before the argument even started. Thompson looked at the woman on the couch. She was crying softly, her hands clasped together. He asked her if she had noticed anything unusual about Marcus's behavior or voice before the argument began. She looked up at him with red eyes and nodded slowly. She said that yes, now that he mentioned it. Marcus had seemed strange. When he first arrived, he'd been angry but coherent, arguing about the money in his normal voice. But after he made the phone call to his mother, something had changed. His expression had gone blank for a moment. Then, when he started arguing again, his voice had sounded different, deeper and harsher. She had thought he was just getting more angry, but looking back, it had been an unsettling change. That was when he had become physical, shoving her with more violence than seemed necessary for an argument about a few $100s. Rodriguez called Thompson over to the coffee table. He had been examining the shattered lamp and had found something embedded in the base. It was a small folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, that had apparently been hidden inside the hollow base of the lamp. Rodriguez carefully unfolded it. The paper contained a handwritten note in faded ink. The writing was in a language neither officer recognized, symbols and characters that looked vaguely like Latin, but were not quite right. At the bottom of the note was a drawing of a symbol, a circle with intersecting lines and strange markings around the perimeter. Thompson photographed the note and refolded it, placing it in an evidence bag. Over the next few hours, the investigation proceeded by standard protocol. The woman was arrested and charged with assault. Her apartment was processed as a crime scene. Statements were taken from all witnesses. Thompson received word from the hospital that Marcus had died from his injuries at 2:17 a.m., which upgraded the charge to involuntary manslaughter. Everything followed normal procedures. But Thompson could not shake the feeling that there was more to this case than a simple drug dispute that turned violent. He spent his off hours over the next few days researching the symbols on the note found in the lamp base. He consulted with professors at the local university who specialized in ancient languages and occult history. One professor identified the symbols as being related to medieval rituals intended to trap or bind malevolent entities. The professor explained that certain objects were believed to contain or restrain dark forces, and that breaking such an object could potentially release whatever had been bound. It was all folklore and superstition, of course, but the professor found it academically interesting that someone had gone to the trouble of creating such a note and hiding it inside a lamp. Thompson thought about Marcus's mother's voicemail, about the change in his voice. He thought about the woman's description of Marcus's eyes rolling back and his personality shifting. He thought about the timing of everything, how the violence had escalated so suddenly after Marcus made that phone call. And he thought about the lamp, shattered on the floor, and the ancient note that had been hidden inside it for who knows how long. The rational explanation was that Marcus had been high on drugs, that his behavior had been erratic because of substances in his system. The toxicology report would confirm or deny that theory. When the toxicology results came back 3 weeks later, they showed that Marcus had no drugs or alcohol in his system at the time of his death. He had been completely sober. The medical examiner noted this was unusual given the circumstances and the criminal history of both parties involved. But sometimes people made violent decisions without chemical influence. The case was closed with the woman pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter. She received a sentence of 6 years with possibility of parole after 3. Justice was served, according to the system. But Thompson never forgot the details that did not quite fit. He kept a copy of the photograph of that strange note in his personal files. Sometimes late at night during his shifts, he would take it out and look at those symbols, wondering what they really meant. He wondered if there were forces in the world that could not be explained by police work and criminal psychology. He wondered if Marcus had truly been possessed by something malevolent in those final minutes of his life, something that had been released when that lamp shattered. And he wondered how many other cases in his career had rational explanations that only covered up deeper mysteries that humanity was not meant to understand. Years later, Thompson would retire from the force with commendations and a spotless record. But he never told anyone about his doubts regarding the Marcus case. It was easier to accept the official narrative, to file it away as just another tragic incident of violence between people involved in criminal activity. Some questions, Thompson learned, were better left unanswered. Some mysteries were meant to remain in the dark where they belonged. Officer Harris had been with the department for 6 years, working patrol and occasional detective support assignments. When his supervisor approached him about a special project, Harris welcomed the change of pace from his usual duties. The Cold Case Division needed help organizing their evidence storage room, a cluttered basement space that had accumulated decades' worth of files, boxes, and physical evidence from unsolved crimes. The room had fallen into disarray after budget cuts eliminated the clerk position responsible for maintaining the cataloging system. Harris was told the project would take several weeks, working during his shift downtime. It seemed like tedious but straightforward work. He had no idea that he was about to discover something that would expose a dark truth about the department itself. The evidence room was exactly as chaotic as promised. Metal shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, packed with cardboard boxes of varying sizes. Each box was supposed to be labeled with a case number, date, and brief description of contents. But many boxes had faded labels or no labels at all. Some shelves held items that had simply been piled there with no organization whatsoever. Harris's job was to go through everything systematically, verify that each item matched the database records, and reorganize the room according to proper protocols. It was going to be a long project. But Harris appreciated the quiet solitude compared to the chaos of patrol work. He started in one corner and worked his way methodically along each shelf. Most boxes contained exactly what their labels indicated: evidence from burglaries, assault cases, drug arrests. He would open each box, photograph the contents, verify against the database entry, update the record if needed, and move on. It was monotonous work, but necessary. The department had recently lost a case because the defense attorney successfully argued that evidence had been mishandled due to poor documentation. The DA wanted to avoid any similar problems in future cases, especially cold cases that might still be prosecuted if new leads developed. Harris was 3 days into the project when he found the unlabeled box. It was tucked in the back corner of a bottom shelf, hidden behind several properly labeled boxes from the late 1990s. The cardboard was old and slightly deteriorated, held together with packing tape that had yellowed with age. There was no case number, no date, no marking of any kind. Harris pulled it out carefully and set it on his work table. When he opened it, his first thought was that someone had mistakenly stored personal items in the evidence room. The box contained what looked like souvenirs or keepsakes. There were Polaroid photographs, a spiral-bound journal, and several small objects, including jewelry and a child's hair ribbon. Harris picked up the photographs and began looking through them. His confusion quickly turned to unease. The Polaroids showed women in various settings. Some appeared to be candid shots taken without the subject's knowledge. Others showed women who appeared unconscious or restrained. The images were disturbing enough that Harris immediately recognized them as potential evidence in serious crimes. He set the photos aside and opened the journal. The entries were dated, spanning from 1985 to 1998. Each entry described surveillance activities, following women, learning their routines, planning opportunities for approach. The handwriting was neat and methodical, describing stalking behavior with clinical detachment. Harris felt his stomach turn as he read entry after entry, detailing predatory behavior targeting vulnerable women. Some entries ended with notes like "successful contact made" or "subject acquired." Harris realized with growing horror that he was reading the documentation of a serial predator's activities spanning over a decade. He immediately stopped reading and reached for his phone to call his supervisor. This evidence needed to be reviewed by detectives right away. But then he saw something that made him freeze with his phone in his hand. At the bottom of each Polaroid photograph was a signature, not printed or stamped, but hand-signed in blue ink. The signature read, D. Morrison. Harris knew that name. Officer David Morrison had been with the department for 30 years before retiring in 2003. He had died of a heart attack in 2011. Harris had never met him personally, but Morrison's photograph hung in the hallway outside the detective bureau alongside other officers who had received commendations during their careers. Morrison had been well respected, even honored for his work on several high-profile cases in the 1990s. Why would his signature be on evidence photographs from what appeared to be stalking and assault cases? Harris set down his phone and picked up the journal again, this time looking more carefully at the entries. He cross-referenced the dates and descriptions with his phone, searching online for missing persons cases from those years. What he found made his blood run cold. 3 of the women described in detail in the journal matched descriptions of women who had gone missing from the area during the 1980s and 1990s. The cases had never been solved. The women had simply vanished, leaving no trace. Police at the time had investigated, but found no leads. The cases had gone cold and eventually been filed away, presumably stored somewhere in this very evidence room. Harris spent the next hour cross-referencing more entries from the journal with historical case files. He found 5 additional women whose disappearances matched the journal's descriptions in terms of dates, locations, and physical descriptions. 8 women total. 8 unsolved missing persons cases spanning 13 years. And this box, containing documentation of their stalking and presumed abductions, had been hidden in the evidence room with no case number, no official record, signed by an officer who had worked those original investigations. The implications were staggering. Either Officer Morrison had collected this evidence during legitimate investigations and failed to properly document it, or Morrison himself had been the predator, and this box was his personal collection of trophies. Harris tried to think of innocent explanations. Maybe Morrison had been conducting an unauthorized investigation into a suspect and kept the evidence separate for some reason. Maybe the box had been misfiled and the signature was simply Morrison's way of documenting his handling of the evidence. But none of these explanations held up to scrutiny. There was no reason for an officer to sign his own name on photographs of victims. There was no protocol that would justify hiding evidence in an unlabeled box. And the journal entries were written in first person, describing the stalking activities as though the writer was committing them, not investigating them. Harris called his supervisor and explained what he had found. Within an hour, 2 detectives from Internal Affairs arrived at the evidence room. They reviewed the contents of the box while Harris provided a detailed account of how he had discovered it. The detectives' expressions grew increasingly grim as they examined the photographs and read sections of the journal. They confiscated the box and instructed Harris not to discuss his discovery with anyone. The matter would be investigated internally before any public disclosure. Over the following weeks, Harris learned through careful unofficial channels what the investigation had uncovered. The Internal Affairs detectives had matched the items in the box to 6 of the 8 missing women from the journal descriptions. The jewelry and hair ribbon belonged to two of the victims, confirmed through family members who still had photographs showing their loved ones wearing those exact items. The Polaroids had been analyzed and confirmed as authentic photographs from the correct time period. The journal's handwriting had been compared to samples from Officer Morrison's personnel file and was determined to be a match. The conclusion was unavoidable. Officer David Morrison had been a serial predator who had used his position in law enforcement to stalk and abduct women over a period of at least 13 years. He had kept evidence of his crimes hidden in the department's own evidence room, confident that the disorganized state of the facility would prevent discovery. And he had been right for decades. Morrison had retired with full honors, lived out his remaining years as a respected member of the community, and died without ever facing justice for his crimes. The victims' families had spent decades wondering what happened to their daughters, sisters, and mothers, never knowing that the truth was locked in a box in the police department basement. The department faced an impossible decision. Revealing Morrison's crimes would bring closure to the victims' families and allow the cases to be officially solved. But it would also expose the fact that a predator had operated within the department for years without detection. It would raise questions about supervision, accountability, and how many other officers might have known or suspected something. The scandal would damage public trust and potentially open the department to lawsuits from the victims' families. After weeks of internal debate, the department made its choice. A press conference was held. The police chief announced that new evidence had been discovered in 6 cold case missing persons investigations. The evidence pointed to a deceased individual who could not be prosecuted, but whose identity would be released to bring closure to the families. Officer David Morrison's name was made public. His photograph was removed from the hallway of honors. The victims' families were notified privately before the public announcement. Some expressed relief at finally knowing the truth. Others expressed anger that Morrison had escaped justice. All of them filed lawsuits against the department for negligent supervision and failure to protect the public from a known threat. Though the department maintained that Morrison's crimes had been completely unknown until the discovery of the evidence box. Harris completed his evidence room reorganization project over the following months. He found no other hidden boxes or undocumented evidence. But the work had lost its peaceful solitude. Every box he opened now carried the possibility of containing another terrible secret. He thought constantly about the women whose lives had been stolen by someone who should have been protecting them. He thought about how easily Morrison's crimes might never have been discovered if budget cuts had not necessitated the evidence room reorganization. How many other departments had similar secrets hidden in their basements, waiting to be found? Eventually, Harris requested a transfer to a different division. He could not continue working in the evidence room, knowing what it had concealed. His supervisor granted the transfer without question, understanding that some discoveries left permanent marks on those who made them. Harris returned to patrol work, but he was changed by what he had found. He looked at veteran officers differently now, wondering what secrets they might carry. He understood that the uniform did not guarantee honor, and that the worst monsters sometimes hid behind badges and oaths. It was a bitter lesson, but one that made him more determined to be the kind of officer who upheld the true meaning of justice, not the corrupted version that Morrison had represented. Officer Clark had been with the department for 3 years when he first responded to a call at 1847 Ashwood Drive. It was a routine wellness check requested by a concerned neighbor who had not seen the elderly resident in several days. When Clark arrived at the property, he found an abandoned house with boarded windows and a front yard overgrown with weeds. The neighbor who made the call apologized profusely, saying she must have gotten the address wrong. Clark filed a report noting the house was vacant and thought nothing more of it. But that was just the first time. Over the next 3 years, Clark would respond to 1847 Ashwood Drive 16 more times, and each visit would become progressively more unsettling until the final call that would make him question everything he thought he understood about reality. The second call came 4 months after the first. This time, it was a noise complaint. A resident 2 blocks away reported hearing screaming coming from the direction of Ashwood Drive in the middle of the night. Clark was dispatched along with his partner to investigate. They drove slowly down the street with their windows down, listening for any disturbance. When they reached 1847 Ashwood Drive, the same abandoned house stood silent and dark. They checked the property, found no signs of entry or activity, and concluded the complainant had been mistaken about the location. The third call was a suspected break-in. Someone driving past claimed they saw flashlight beams moving inside the house. Again, Clark responded. Again, he found nothing. After the 5th or 6th call, Clark started to notice the pattern. Every call came from a different person reporting different concerns, but they all identified 1847 Ashwood Drive as the source of the problem. Domestic disputes, suspicious vehicles, possible intruders, sounds of distress. The calls came at various times, day and night, with weeks or sometimes months between them. But the result was always the same. By the time police arrived, there was nothing to find. No people, no vehicles, no evidence that anyone had been at the property. Clark mentioned the strange pattern to his sergeant, who pulled the history on the address. The records showed that 1847 Ashwood Drive had been the site of a murder-suicide in October 2009. A man named Gerald Vance had killed his wife and then himself inside the house. The property had been foreclosed by the bank after sitting on the market for 2 years with no buyers. The house had been empty ever since, slowly deteriorating as vandals occasionally broke in and the neighborhood declined around it. But here was the strange part. The 911 calls about the address had started in 2010, just months after the murder-suicide, and had continued regularly for over a decade. Dozens of calls from different people, all reporting activity at an abandoned house where no activity was possible. Clark's sergeant suggested that the house had simply gained a reputation in the neighborhood as a place where bad things happened, and residents were hyper-vigilant about any real or imagined disturbances nearby. People heard sounds from other houses and misidentified the source as coming from the notorious murder house. It made sense logically, and Clark accepted this explanation. But as he continued to respond to calls at 1847 Ashwood Drive, he began to doubt the rational narrative. Because some of the calls were not coming from neighbors. They were coming from inside the house. The police dispatch system showed the phone number and location for every 911 call. Most calls came from cell phones with approximate tower locations. But starting with Clark's 8th or 9th response to 1847 Ashwood Drive, several of the calls showed as originating from a landline at that exact address. The first time Clark noticed this, he assumed it was an error in the system. But when it happened again, he asked dispatch to verify. The dispatcher confirmed that the call was coming from the landline registered to 1847 Ashwood Drive, a number that had been disconnected by the phone company in 2009 after the murder-suicide. Somehow calls were being placed from a phone line that did not exist, from a house where no one lived. Clark researched the phenomenon and found that old phone lines can sometimes cross signals or create phantom connections, especially in areas with outdated infrastructure. This seemed like a reasonable explanation until he actually answered one of those calls. It happened on a Tuesday night in November. Clark was on patrol when dispatch radioed that a 911 call had just come in from 1847 Ashwood Drive. The caller had not spoken, but dispatch could hear background noise before the line disconnected. Clark was only 3 blocks away. He told dispatch he would check it out and arrived at the house within 2 minutes. As always, the house was dark and appeared undisturbed. But this time, Clark's instincts told him something was different. He stood on the overgrown front lawn, staring at the boarded windows, and felt an overwhelming sense that he was being watched. His radio crackled, and dispatch came back on. Another 911 call was coming from the Ashwood address right now, while Clark was standing outside. Dispatch asked if he could see anyone inside. Clark said no, but he was going to investigate. He approached the front door, which was secured with a padlock. The windows were all boarded from the outside with no way to see in. He walked around the perimeter of the house and found no signs of entry. Then his phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for 1847 Ashwood Drive. Clark answered. For several seconds, there was silence. Then he heard breathing on the other end. Heavy, labored breathing, like someone in distress. Clark identified himself and asked who was calling. The breathing continued. Then a voice spoke, distorted and barely audible. It said his name. Clark. Just his last name, spoken in a raspy whisper. The line went dead. Clark immediately radioed for backup and drew his weapon. If someone was inside that house with access to a phone, they were trespassing and potentially dangerous. More concerning was the fact that they knew his name. 3 other units responded within minutes. The officers forced entry through the front door and cleared the house room by room with flashlights. The interior was exactly what one would expect from an abandoned property. Water damage, peeling wallpaper, trash left by squatters and vandals. In the master bedroom, they found the stains on the carpet where the bodies had been discovered years earlier. But there were no people inside, no phone equipment. No way anyone could have made those calls. The officers conducted a thorough search, checking every closet, every corner, even the crawl space under the house. Nothing. Clark's sergeant ordered a technical investigation. The phone company sent a technician to verify the landline status. The technician confirmed that the line to 1847 Ashwood Drive had been permanently disconnected in 2009. The physical phone line had been cut at the street junction box. There was no possible way for that number to place calls. Yet the 911 system logs showed multiple calls from that exact number over the past several years, including the ones that had just occurred while officers were on scene. The technician had no explanation for how this was possible. Over the next few months, the calls from 1847 Ashwood Drive continued. Clark responded each time, and each time he found nothing. But the calls became more disturbing. Sometimes when he answered, his phone would ring from that number, and he would hear voices in the background. Crying, arguing, sounds consistent with a domestic disturbance. Once he heard what sounded like a woman screaming, followed by 2 loud bangs like gunshots, then silence. Each time he rushed to the house and found it empty. Clark became obsessed with understanding what was happening. He researched the history of Gerald and Patricia Vance, the couple who had died in the house. He interviewed neighbors who remembered them. They described an unhappy marriage, frequent arguments, police calls for domestic disputes. Gerald had been controlling and abusive. Patricia had tried to leave him several times, but always returned. On the night of the murder-suicide, neighbors heard shouting, then screams, then gunshots. Police arrived to find both of them dead. Gerald had shot Patricia in the bedroom and then turned the gun on himself. The case was straightforward, closed quickly, and filed away. But Clark discovered something strange in the old case files. In the weeks leading up to the murder-suicide, Patricia Vance had called 911 multiple times, reporting that her husband was threatening her. Each time, Police responded and found Gerald calm and cooperative. Patricia would recant her accusations, saying she had overreacted. Officers documented the calls, but made no arrests. After the murder, there was some internal discussion about whether the department had failed to protect Patricia. But ultimately, it was decided that officers had followed proper procedures. There was no way to know Gerald would escalate to murder. Patricia's final 911 call had come on the night she died. She told the dispatcher her husband had a gun and was going to kill her. By the time police arrived, both were already dead. Clark realized the calls to 1847 Ashwood Drive matched the pattern of Patricia's calls for help. They were desperate, recurring, and seemingly impossible to verify or resolve. It was as though her final terrified moments had left an imprint on that house, a psychic echo that continued to reach out through disconnected phone lines, pleading for help that would never come. Clark knew how insane this sounded. He was a police officer, trained to deal with facts and evidence, not ghost stories. But he could not deny what he experienced. The calls were real. The voice saying his name was real. Whatever was happening at 1847 Ashwood Drive transcended normal explanation. On Clark's 17th and final response to the address, he made a decision. He entered the house alone without backup, without telling anyone where he was going. He needed to confront whatever was in that house, to understand it or make it stop. He walked through the rooms with his flashlight, calling out to Patricia Vance by name. He told her he was sorry no one had helped her in time. He said that her husband could not hurt her anymore. The house remained silent. Then his flashlight flickered and died. In the darkness, he heard footsteps moving across the floor above him. He heard a door slam. He heard that same raspy breathing from the phone calls close behind him in the dark. Clark ran. He got out of that house and drove away, and he submitted his transfer request the next morning. Clark moved to a different precinct across town. He never responded to another call at 1847 Ashwood Drive. But according to department records, the calls from that address continue to this day. Other officers respond, find nothing, file reports, and move on. Most of them probably think it is just system glitches or neighborhood pranks. But Clark knows better. Some places hold on to their trauma, replaying their worst moments like recordings that never stop. And some calls for help echo forever, unanswered, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to finally listen. Officer Lewis had conducted thousands of traffic stops during his 7 years on patrol. The routine was always the same. Lights and sirens, pull the vehicle over, approach with caution, check license and registration, issue citation or warning, move on. Most stops were uneventful. Speeding tickets, broken tail lights, expired tags. Occasionally, there would be an arrest for outstanding warrants or drug possession. But those situations followed predictable patterns. Lewis prided himself on his ability to read people and assess threats quickly. He trusted his instincts and his training. But nothing in his experience prepared him for what happened on Highway 9 just after midnight on a moonless November night. Lewis was working the late shift, patrolling the rural stretch of highway that connected two small towns. Traffic was light at that hour, mostly long-haul truckers and the occasional commuter heading home from a late shift. He was parked in his usual spot near mile marker 47, running radar, when a dark sedan passed going 58 in a 55 zone. Technically over the limit, but Lewis normally would not pull someone over for 3 miles per hour. However, as the sedan passed under a street light, he noticed the right taillight was out. That was a legitimate safety violation. He pulled onto the highway and activated his lights. The sedan slowed immediately and pulled onto the shoulder. No attempt to flee or delay. The driver was being cooperative, which Lewis appreciated. He called in the stop to dispatch, providing the license plate number and his location. Then he approached the vehicle on the driver's side, his flashlight in hand and his other hand resting near his weapon. Standard procedure. The driver's window rolled down as Lewis approached. Inside was a man who appeared to be in his mid-40s, wearing a button-down shirt and glasses. He looked like an accountant or office worker. Nothing threatening about him. Lewis introduced himself and explained the reason for the stop. The man nodded and reached for his wallet without being asked. He handed over his driver's license politely. Lewis examined it. The name was Michael Harrison, address in the next county over. No obvious signs of tampering or forgery. The photo matched the man behind the wheel. Lewis asked for the vehicle registration and insurance. The man opened the glove compartment and retrieved the documents, handing them over with the same calm cooperation. Everything seemed completely normal. Lewis returned to his patrol car to run the information through the system. He entered the license plate number into the computer and waited for the results. The system took longer than usual to respond, which was not uncommon on the older patrol car computers. When the results finally appeared, Lewis felt his first twinge of confusion. The plate number returned no results. Not suspended, not stolen, just nothing. The system showed no vehicle registered to that plate number in any state database. Lewis tried again, carefully re-entering the numbers and letters. Same result. No vehicle found. He tried the VIN number from the registration document. Again, nothing. The VIN did not exist in any records. Lewis sat in his patrol car, staring at the computer screen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A vehicle could not be on the road without registration. Every car, truck, and motorcycle had to be registered with a state DMV and assigned a VIN number during manufacture. There was no way for a vehicle to simply not exist in the system unless the plates were fake or the VIN had been removed and replaced with a false number. But the plates and VIN looked legitimate, not homemade or tampered with. This was becoming suspicious quickly. Lewis radioed dispatch and explained the situation. The dispatcher ran the information again from her end and confirmed the same results. No record of the vehicle or VIN. She asked if Lewis wanted backup. He considered it, but decided to approach the driver again first and get clarification before escalating the situation. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Perhaps the registration was recently processed and had not entered the system yet. Lewis got out of his patrol car and walked back toward the sedan, his instincts now on high alert. As he approached the driver's window again, Lewis shone his flashlight into the vehicle to get a better look at the interior. The back seat was empty except for a briefcase and a jacket. Nothing unusual. But as his light swept across the car, he noticed something that made him stop. The driver's reflection in the rearview mirror did not match the man sitting in the driver's seat. The reflection showed someone younger, with different facial features and no glasses. Lewis blinked and looked again. The reflection was back to normal, matching the driver. He convinced himself it had been a trick of the light or the angle of his flashlight. Lewis asked the driver about the registration issue. The man looked confused and said the car was registered properly, that he had just renewed the registration 2 months ago. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the problem. Lewis asked him to step out of the vehicle. The man complied without protest, opening the door and standing beside the car. Lewis asked if there was anything in the vehicle that Lewis should be aware of. Any weapons, drugs, or illegal items. The man said no. Lewis asked if he could search the vehicle. The man hesitated, then said yes. Lewis began searching the car while the man stood on the shoulder watching. The front seats revealed nothing unusual registration and insurance documents in the glove box, a phone charger in the center console, a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder. Lewis moved to the back seat. The briefcase was unlocked. Inside were papers, what looked like financial documents or work reports. The jacket in the back seat had nothing in the pockets. Lewis was about to conclude the search when he noticed something odd about the back door on the passenger side. It was slightly ajar, not fully closed. Lewis had not seen the door open. He looked at the man standing by the front of the car. The man was watching him, but said nothing. Lewis opened the back door fully to check if something was preventing it from closing properly. As the door swung open, he looked into the back seat and froze. Sitting in the back seat was a figure, a person. Someone had been there the entire time, sitting perfectly still in the shadows, where Lewis had not seen them when he first shone his light through the windows. The figure was wearing dark clothes and had their head down as though sleeping. Lewis immediately drew his weapon and ordered the person to show their hands and exit the vehicle. The figure did not move. Lewis shouted the command again, his heart pounding. Still no response. He reached forward carefully and touched the figure's shoulder. The moment his hand made contact, the figure collapsed. It fell sideways onto the seat, and Lewis realized with horror that it was not a person. It was clothing arranged to look like a person, stuffed with something to give it shape, a decoy. But why would someone create a fake passenger? Lewis looked up at the driver, who was still standing calmly by the front of the car. Their eyes met. The driver smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Lewis ordered the man to get on the ground. The man did not comply. Instead, he turned and started walking away from the car, moving toward the darkness beyond the highway shoulder. Lewis shouted for him to stop. The man kept walking. Lewis ran after him, reaching out to grab his arm. His hand passed through empty air. The man was there. Lewis could see him clearly, but his hand found nothing solid to grab. Lewis tried again with the same result. It was as though the man was not physically present, just an image or projection. Lewis backed away, his mind struggling to process what was happening. He drew his weapon and aimed it at the figure, shouting commands that went unanswered. The man stopped walking and turned to face Lewis. Then his appearance began to change. His features shifted, becoming younger and then older, cycling through different faces too quickly to track. His clothes changed colors. His height seemed to fluctuate. Lewis was looking at something that was not human, something that only resembled a person. The figure spoke. Its voice was layered, multiple voices speaking in unison. It said that Lewis had been chosen to witness, that the boundaries were thinner here, that others would come. Then it turned and walked into the darkness beyond the highway, fading from view within seconds. Lewis stood on the shoulder of Highway 9, breathing hard, his weapon still drawn, staring into the empty night. The sedan was still sitting there with its lights on and the back door open. The fake passenger was still arranged on the back seat. Lewis radioed for backup, his voice shaking as he tried to explain what had just happened. 2 units responded and arrived within 15 minutes. By the time they got there, Lewis had checked the sedan thoroughly. There was no driver's license or registration in the vehicle now, though Lewis was certain he had handled those documents. The glove box was empty. The briefcase in the back seat was gone. Only the clothing dummy remained, arranged to look like a sleeping passenger. The responding officers searched the area but found no sign of the driver. They documented the abandoned vehicle and called for a tow truck. The sedan was impounded and examined by investigators. The VIN number was confirmed to not exist in any database. The plates were traced and found to have been reported stolen from a junkyard 3 states away 2 years earlier. How the vehicle was constructed or where it came from remained a mystery. The clothing used to create the fake passenger was analyzed and determined to be common retail items available at any department store. There were no fingerprints anywhere in or on the vehicle, no DNA, no trace evidence that would identify who had been driving it. Lewis filed an official report describing the traffic stop and the driver's disappearance. He did not include the details about the changing reflection, the inability to physically touch the driver, or the shifting appearance. Those elements would have made him sound insane. Even his edited report was met with skepticism. The investigating detective suggested Lewis had been the victim of an elaborate prank, that someone had abandoned the vehicle after seeing the lights and fled on foot. The fake passenger was explained as either a joke or an attempt to use the HOV lane. Lewis did not argue. He accepted the official interpretation even though he knew it was wrong. In the months that followed, Lewis continued working Highway 9 during the late shift. He conducted traffic stops as always, following the same procedures he had always followed. But he watched every driver more carefully now. He looked for signs that they might not be what they appeared to be. And sometimes, late at night when the highway was empty and dark, he would park near mile marker 47 and watch for that sedan. He never saw it again. But twice he saw other vehicles that returned no results when he ran their plates. Both times he let them pass without pulling them over. Some mysteries were better left uninvestigated. Detective Walker had spent 12 years working homicide cases, and in that time he had conducted hundreds of interrogations. He had interviewed witnesses who could not remember crucial details. He had questioned suspects who lied with practiced ease. He had sat across from killers who showed no remorse and victims' families who demanded justice he could not always provide. Walker thought he had developed the ability to read people, to separate truth from deception, to understand the psychology of criminals. But nothing in his training or experience prepared him for the interview he conducted with Raymond Becker, a man on death row with less than 3 weeks until his scheduled execution. Becker had been convicted of murder 12 years earlier. The case had been straightforward. Becker had killed his business partner during an argument over money, shooting him 3 times in the chest in Becker's office after business hours. Security camera footage showed Becker arriving at the office building alone at 9:30 p.m. His partner arrived at 9:45 p.m. At 10:17 p.m., Becker was seen leaving the building carrying a large duffel bag. His partner's body was discovered the next morning by the cleaning crew. Becker was arrested within 24 hours. The murder weapon was found in his home. His fingerprints were on the gun. Ballistics matched. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Becker was sentenced to death. For 12 years, Becker had maintained his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. He filed appeals that were denied. He gave interviews to reporters claiming he had been framed. His lawyers exhausted every legal avenue trying to overturn the conviction. Nothing worked. The evidence was too solid, the case too clear. Becker was going to die for his crime. Then 3 weeks before his execution date, Becker contacted the district attorney's office with an unusual request. He wanted to speak with a homicide detective about other murders. He claimed he had information about unsolved cases, and he would provide details in exchange for nothing. No deal, no reduced sentence, no stay of execution. He just wanted to confess before he died. Walker was assigned to conduct the interview. The DA's office was skeptical that Becker had any legitimate information. Death row inmates often made false confessions seeking attention or attempting to delay their executions. But procedure required that all leads be investigated, no matter how unlikely. Walker reviewed Becker's case file thoroughly before driving to the state penitentiary where Becker was housed. He brought recording equipment and a detailed knowledge of every unsolved homicide in the region over the past 20 years. If Becker was going to confess to additional murders, Walker would be able to verify whether the confessions were legitimate or fabricated. The interview room at the prison was small and windowless, with concrete walls painted institutional gray. A metal table was bolted to the floor with chairs on either side. Becker was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit and restraints. He was 53 years old, thin and pale from years of incarceration. His hair had gone completely gray. He sat down across from Walker and waited while the guards removed his handcuffs, though his ankles remained shackled to the floor. Walker introduced himself and explained that their conversation was being recorded. Becker nodded and said he understood. Walker began with standard questions. Why did Becker want to talk now? What information did he have? Becker said he had spent 12 years thinking about his life and the things he had done. He said his execution date had focused his mind on the need to clear his conscience. He said he was guilty of more than just the murder he had been convicted for. He wanted to confess to 7 additional murders that had never been solved. Walker asked him to describe these murders. Becker began to talk. The first case Becker described was a woman who had been found dead in her apartment in 1998. The death had been ruled a suicide. She had taken pills and left a note. Becker said it was not suicide. He said he had broken into her apartment, forced her to take the pills, and written the note himself, copying her handwriting from documents he found in her desk. He described details about the apartment layout that were accurate. He knew about a hidden spare key under a flower pot that had never been mentioned in any reports. He described the content of the suicide note, which had never been made public. Walker felt the first stirrings of unease. This was not a false confession. Becker knew things only the killer would know. Becker continued describing cases. A man who drowned in a boating accident in 2001. Becker said he had sabotaged the boat. A woman who died in a house fire in 2004. Becker said he had started the fire. Case after case, Becker provided details that matched unsolved or incorrectly solved deaths. He described victims' habits and routines. He knew details about crime scenes that had never been released to the public. Walker cross-referenced everything Becker said with case files, and every detail checked out. Becker was confessing to real murders that he had actually committed. 7 victims across 3 states spanning 15 years. 7 families who had never received justice. 7 cases that would now be solved. The interview lasted 4 hours. Walker filled notebook after notebook with details that would need to be verified by other investigators. He arranged for follow-up interviews with detectives from other jurisdictions whose cases Becker had confessed to. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as it should. Then halfway through the recording, something changed. Becker's demeanor shifted. His voice, which had been calm and steady, dropped in pitch. It became deeper, harsher, almost guttural. His posture changed. He sat up straighter, his shoulders squared. His facial expression went from resigned to something Walker could not quite identify. Not angry, not scared. Something else, something predatory. Walker noticed the change immediately, but continued with his questions. He asked Becker to describe the 7th victim. Becker began to speak, but the voice coming from his mouth did not sound like Becker anymore. The deep, harsh tone continued as he described details of a murder from 2008. But then Becker started saying things that were not related to the case. He started describing Walker's family. He said Walker's daughter attended Jefferson Elementary School. He said she walked home most days, but sometimes Walker's wife picked her up in their blue Honda. He said Walker's wife liked to shop at the grocery store on Oak Street on Tuesday afternoons. He knew their home address. He described the layout of their house. He knew that Walker kept his service weapon in a safe in the bedroom closet. Walker felt ice run through his veins. None of this information was public. Becker had been in prison for 12 years. There was no way he should know anything about Walker's family. Walker had not even been a detective when Becker was arrested. They had no connection. Walker asked Becker how he knew these things. Becker smiled. It was not Becker's smile. The expression on his face looked wrong, like someone wearing an ill-fitting mask. The voice said that it knew everything about Walker. It knew about the case that had gone wrong 3 years ago. It knew about the evidence that had been mishandled. It knew about the suspect who had walked free because of that mistake. It knew things that Walker had never told anyone. Walker stopped the recording. He called for the guards to remove Becker from the room. As Becker was being escorted out, he turned back to look at Walker. His expression had returned to normal. His voice was back to its usual tone. He looked confused and asked what had happened, why the interview was being ended. He said he had more information to provide. Walker did not answer. He gathered his notes and recording equipment and left the prison immediately. In his car, he sat for a long time trying to process what had just occurred. He reviewed the recording. The change in Becker's voice was clear on the audio. The impossible knowledge about Walker's family was documented. Walker reported the incident to his supervisor. Together, they reviewed the recording multiple times. The supervisor agreed that something unusual had happened, but could not explain it. A psychologist was consulted. She suggested that Becker might have been exhibiting symptoms of dissociative identity disorder, where different personalities emerge under stress. She said it was possible that an alternate personality had access to information that Becker's primary personality did not consciously recall. Perhaps Becker had researched the detectives who might interview him, and his subconscious retained that information. It was a stretch, but it was the only rational explanation available. Walker requested that someone else complete the follow-up interviews with Becker. His request was denied. He was the lead investigator on the confessions. He had the most complete understanding of the cases. He needed to finish what he had started. Walker returned to the prison 2 days later to continue the interview. This time, he brought another detective with him as a witness. Becker was cooperative and apologized for whatever had happened during the previous session. He said he did not remember saying anything about Walker's family. He seemed genuine. Walker resumed questioning about the murders. Becker provided additional details, locations of evidence that had never been found, explanations of how he had avoided detection. Everything was useful and verifiable. The interview concluded without incident. Walker spent the next 2 weeks coordinating with other law enforcement agencies to verify Becker's confessions. Search warrants were executed. Evidence was recovered. Victims' families were notified. Every confession checked out. Becker had committed all 7 murders exactly as he described. The cases were officially closed. Justice was served, even if it came 12 years too late for some families. Becker's execution proceeded as scheduled. He was put to death by lethal injection on November 14th at 12:01 a.m. Walker did not attend. In the months after Becker's execution, Walker continued to think about that moment in the interview room when Becker's voice had changed and impossible knowledge had poured out. He thought about the look in Becker's eyes, the sense that he was looking at something that was not entirely human. He thought about how easily Becker had accessed information about Walker's family that should have been private. Walker changed his daily routines. He varied his wife's schedule. He drove his daughter to school instead of letting her walk. He upgraded the security system at his home. He moved his service weapon to a different location. He took precautions against a threat that rationally should not exist. Becker was dead. The information had been a trick or a coincidence or explained by psychology. But Walker never felt completely safe again. Sometimes late at night, he would wake up with the sense that he was being watched. He would check his home security cameras and find nothing. He would look in on his sleeping daughter and feel relief that she was safe. He would go back to bed and lie awake wondering if there were things in the world that could not be explained by police work and criminal psychology. Things that could inhabit human bodies and speak through human mouths. Things that knew secrets they should not know. Walker never found answers to these questions. He learned to live with the uncertainty, with the knowledge that some mysteries ran deeper than any case file could document. Officer Allen had been partners with Officer Davis for 4 years. They had worked hundreds of shifts together, responding to everything from petty theft to armed robberies. They knew each other's habits, trusted each other's judgment, and had developed the kind of unspoken communication that only came from years of working side by side in dangerous situations. So when Allen heard the panic in Davis's voice over the radio on the night of October 3rd, 2019, he knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. Davis did not panic. He was the calm one, the veteran who had seen everything and remained steady under pressure. But the voice coming through Allen's radio was frantic, barely coherent, and filled with a fear that Allen had never heard from his partner before. Davis had been investigating a series of break-ins in the rural outskirts of Cumberland County. Over the past 6 months, 14 homes in the area had been burglarized. The pattern was unusual. The homes were all isolated, separated from neighbors by acres of farmland or forest. The break-ins occurred during the day when residents were at work. Nothing of significant value was ever taken. Small items would go missing, food from refrigerators, changes of clothes, toiletries. It was as though someone was living in these homes while the owners were away, taking just enough to survive, but not enough to trigger major police investigations. Most victims did not even realize they had been burglarized until they noticed multiple small items missing over time. Davis had developed a theory. He believed the burglar was homeless or transient, someone who was moving through the county and using empty homes as temporary shelter. Davis had identified several abandoned buildings in the area that might serve as base camps. One of them was the old Cumberland County Hospital, a 3-story structure that had been closed since 2005 due to budget cuts and declining patient numbers. The building had been scheduled for demolition multiple times, but the project kept getting delayed due to funding issues and environmental concerns about asbestos abatement. The hospital sat empty on the edge of town, fenced off and marked with no trespassing signs that were routinely ignored by vandals and curious teenagers. Davis had gone to investigate the hospital alone on that October night. He had not requested backup because he was not expecting to find anyone. He was simply doing reconnaissance, checking the building to see if there were signs of recent occupation. Allen was patrolling a different section of the county when Davis radioed in at 9:47 p.m. to report that he had arrived at the hospital and was going to take a look around. Allen acknowledged and continued his patrol. 23 minutes later, Davis's voice erupted over the radio in a transmission that would become crucial evidence in the investigation that followed. The transmission was broken and unclear. Davis was breathing hard, almost panting. His words came in fragments. He said something about the walls. He said he was being watched. He said someone had been there the whole time. Then the transmission cut to static. Allen immediately radioed back, asking Davis to repeat and clarify his status. No response. Allen radioed dispatch and reported that Davis was not responding and might be in distress. He provided the location and requested immediate backup. Then Allen turned his patrol car around and drove at high speed toward the hospital, his lights and sirens cutting through the dark, rural roads. Alan arrived at the hospital at 10:18 p.m. Davis's patrol car was parked in the crumbling parking lot in front of the main entrance. The driver's door was open. The vehicle's lights were on and the radio was still transmitting, though no one was speaking. Alan could hear the static and occasional crackle of the open channel. He drew his weapon and approached the patrol car carefully. The interior was empty. Davis's radio handset was sitting on the seat, still keyed to transmit. His flashlight was on the dashboard. His hat was on the passenger seat. But Davis was gone. Alan entered the hospital through the main entrance, which stood open. The interior was dark except for the beam of his flashlight. The lobby was filled with debris, broken ceiling tiles, and scattered furniture left behind when the hospital closed. Graffiti covered the walls. The smell of mold and decay was overwhelming. Alan called out for Davis, his voice echoing through the empty corridors. No response. He radioed dispatch and reported that Davis was not with his vehicle and that he was entering the building to search. Dispatch confirmed that backup units were en route. Estimated arrival time, 8 minutes. Alan moved through the first floor systematically, clearing rooms one by one. Old patient rooms with beds still in place. Examination rooms with equipment long since stripped for parts. A cafeteria with tables overturned. Everything was coated in dust and showed signs of weather damage from broken windows. Alan found no sign of Davis or anyone else. He moved to the stairwell and climbed to the second floor. The darkness was nearly absolute here. His flashlight beam revealed more abandoned rooms and long hallways that stretched into shadow. He continued calling for Davis, listening for any sound of movement or response. On the third floor, Alan found the first sign that someone had been living in the building. In one of the larger rooms that might have once been a ward, he discovered evidence of recent occupation. There were sleeping bags arranged on the floor. Dozens of them, at least 20 or 30, all laid out in neat rows. Food containers and water bottles were stacked against the walls. Clothing hung from makeshift lines strung between exposed pipes. Flashlights and battery-powered lanterns sat on windowsills. This was not a temporary shelter for one homeless person. This was a permanent camp for a large group. Alan radioed his discovery to dispatch just as he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around with his flashlight and weapon raised. A figure was standing in the doorway, partially obscured by shadow. Alan ordered the person to show their hands and identify themselves. The figure stepped into the light. It was a man, maybe 40 years old, wearing dirty clothes and carrying a backpack. He raised his hand slowly. Alan asked where Davis was. The man said he did not know anyone named Davis. Alan asked how many people were living in the hospital. The man hesitated, then said there were others, many others. They had been living there for months, moving through the condemned buildings in the county, staying ahead of demolition schedules and police patrols. They were squatters, homeless individuals who had formed a community in the abandoned spaces no one else wanted. Alan heard more footsteps. Other people were emerging from the shadows of the hallways, drawn by the sound of voices and the flashlight beam. Within a minute, Alan was surrounded by 15 people, all dressed in similar worn clothing, all watching him with wary expressions. Alan kept his weapon drawn but did not aim at anyone specific. He asked again about Davis. An older woman in the group spoke up. She said a police officer had come through earlier. They had hidden when they heard him coming. They watched him from inside the walls. The building had service corridors and crawl spaces behind the patient rooms, old maintenance access points that allowed someone to move through the building unseen. They had used these passages to avoid detection while Davis searched the floors. But Davis had discovered one of the access panels and had gone into the walls to investigate. They had heard him moving around inside. Then they heard him calling on his radio, then silence. Alan demanded to be shown where Davis had entered the walls. The group led him back down to the second floor, to a patient room where a wall panel had been removed. Behind the panel was a narrow passage that ran parallel to the main corridor. Alan crawled through with his flashlight, his radio, and his weapon. The passage was barely wide enough for him to move. It was pitch black except for his flashlight beam. He could see footprints in the thick dust on the floor, recent prints leading deeper into the passage. He followed them. The passage opened into a larger maintenance corridor that connected to a service stairwell. Alan descended the stairs, following the footprints. At the bottom was a basement level that did not appear on any building plans he had seen. The basement was a maze of storage rooms, mechanical spaces, and tunnels that connected different parts of the hospital complex. Alan's radio was barely functional this deep underground, only occasional bursts of static breaking through. He continued following the footprints until he found Davis. Davis was sitting with his back against a wall in a small mechanical room. His flashlight had died. He was holding his radio but not transmitting. When Alan's flashlight beam found him, Davis looked up with an expression of profound relief. He was uninjured, but clearly shaken. Alan helped him to his feet, and they made their way back through the tunnels to the main building. As they climbed the stairs back to the second floor, Davis explained what had happened. He had been following the passages in the walls when his flashlight had failed. He had become disoriented in the darkness and could not find his way back. He had tried to radio for help, but the signal would not transmit from inside the walls. He had sat down to conserve his phone battery and wait for rescue, knowing that Alan would come looking for him. By the time Alan and Davis emerged from the building, backup had arrived. 6 patrol cars were in the parking lot, along with an ambulance. The squatters who had been living in the hospital were detained and questioned. Their identities were documented. Social services was called to provide assistance. The investigation into the break-ins progressed rapidly once the squatters were identified. 3 of them admitted to entering homes during the day to take supplies. They had not meant to frighten anyone or cause harm. They were simply trying to survive. They were arrested and charged with multiple counts of burglary. The others in the group were offered shelter through county assistance programs. Most declined and moved on to other locations. The hospital was secured and scheduled for immediate demolition. Within 6 months, it was reduced to rubble, and the lot was cleared. The case of the break-ins was closed with arrests and convictions. Davis received a commendation for his investigative work that led to identifying the perpetrators. Alan received recognition for his successful rescue of his partner. Everything ended well from an official perspective. Justice was served. The community was safer. 2 officers had performed their duties with distinction, but the incident left a permanent mark on both Alan and Davis. Their partnership was never quite the same after that night. Davis had experienced something in those dark passages that he rarely talked about. The feeling of being watched by dozens of eyes he could not see. The knowledge that people had been living secretly in plain sight for months without detection. The vulnerability of being lost and helpless in the darkness beneath a building. Alan understood, because he had felt it too when he crawled through those passages searching for his partner. The sense that the world held hidden spaces where people existed outside of normal society, invisible and unknown, until circumstances forced them into the light. It was unsettling on a fundamental level that had nothing to do with danger or violence, and everything to do with the realization that reality was less stable and knowable than they had believed. Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight, we bring you 7 of the most disturbing true Appalachia deep wood horror stories ever submitted to this channel. Accounts from people who stepped off the trail and into places the mountains were never meant to share with outsiders. These are not campfire inventions, but first-hand confessions from hunters, locals, and wanderers who came forward with experiences too specific, too consistent, and too unsettling to dismiss as imagination. Names, locations, and timelines have been cross-checked wherever possible. And in several cases, their stories align with missing person reports, forgotten police files, and patterns whispered about for generations in those hills. In these woods, you will hear of a hidden camp that should not exist, voices that borrow the memories of the dead, an old folk bargain that may have cost a stranger their life, and a cabin that shows up only when you are already lost. If you value slow-burning, authentic horror drawn from real encounters instead of cheap jump scares, subscribe to Buried Files and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next descent into the unknown. After you hear these testimonies, share your own Appalachian experiences or unexplained encounters in the comments below, because your story may be the next case we uncover. Now settle in, dim the lights, and listen closely as we enter the deep woods where the mountains decide who returns. My name is Thomas, and if you ever see the ridgeline go dark all at once, you turn around. You do not stop to look, you do not pull out your phone, and you do not tell yourself it is just a cloud. The mountains here do not use clouds when they want you gone. They use shadow, and sometimes they use men. I grew up in a hollow where most folks knew each other's trucks by the sound of the engine before they even came around the bend. We had one church, one gas station, and more deer than people. I learned how to shoot before I learned long division. By the time I was 16, I knew every game trail in a 10-mile radius better than I knew the hallways of my high school. Back then, the woods were just woods to me. Trees, rocks, creeks, maybe a black bear once in a while if you were unlucky or stupid. My granddad always talked about other things in the timber, the kind people left offerings for in the old days. But I filed those stories under the same category as Santa and the Easter Bunny. I believed in what I could track. I believed in boot prints and beer cans and drag marks in the leaves. You could say I believed in people being the worst monsters around, but even that was more of a joke than a philosophy. Funny thing about jokes, sometimes the mountain waits for you to laugh, and then it wipes the smile right off your face. It was early October the year it happened. The air had that sharp edge that makes your breath show up in front of you like cigarette smoke. Leaves were just starting to turn. My friends Cole and Ray had this brilliant idea that we were going to camp on the far side of Buckthorn Ridge, way past where the marked trails ended. We were all 18, freshly out of school, too broke for anything fun that involved gas money, and just bored enough to go looking for trouble. We took my truck as far as the logging road would allow, parked by a rusted old gate that had not been closed in years, and started hiking. We had cheap tents, off-brand flashlights, and a cooler full of warm beer that we were sure would taste better once night fell. The sun was low, slipping between the branches, painting everything that late afternoon gold that makes the forest look harmless. About an hour into the hike, Cole spotted something off to the right, down in a little dip where the trees grew thicker. "Y'all ever seen that trail?" he asked. I looked where he pointed. It was not really a trail. More like a faint path where the ground had been packed down by boots over a long time. No blaze marks, no signs. Just a suggestion of a way through, half hidden by dead leaves. "Nah," I said. "Probably just some old hunter's path." "Old hunter's path is where the deer are," Ray said, "and where the good camping spots are. We should have stayed on the logging cut. Should have kept going to the overlook where we had camped before. But boredom and beer are a bad combination, and none of us wanted to be the one who said no. So we turned off, ducking under low branches, following that barely there path deeper into the trees. It did not feel strange at first, just quieter. The sound of the main trail traffic vanished behind us. No distant ATVs, no voices. Just the crunch of our boots and the occasional call of a crow. The ground sloped down, then flattened out into a hollow that felt cooler than it should have, like the sun could not quite reach it right. That is where I first noticed the ridge line. Up above, you could see the cutout of the trees against the sky. A jagged black line with the orange and red of the setting sun behind it. I remember thinking it looked like teeth. Then a cloud moved across the sun, or that is what I told myself. And the whole line went dark, from left to right, like someone had run a paintbrush of shadow across it. Something in my stomach tightened, a little pinch of instinct. Maybe we should just camp up higher, I said. We go too low, it's gonna get damp. Cole laughed. You scared of a little dew, Tommy boy? I shrugged it off. No one wants to be the cautious one when you are 18 and stupid. We kept going. The smell hit us before anything else did. Not death exactly. Not that sweet rot of something long dead. This was fresher, like blood on iron and wet leather. I could taste it in the back of my throat. Damn, Ray muttered. Somebody's cleaning a deer down here. We stepped into a sort of clearing, if you could call it that. It was more like a spot where the underbrush had been beaten back and the trees seemed to lean away from the center. Tarps were strung between trunks, their camo pattern already faded. 2 battered green tents sat half-collapsed near a ring of stones blackened from old fires. And then I saw the hooks. They were hanging from a thick crossbeam someone had lashed between 2 trees, 6 of them in a row. Big, ugly meat hooks, the kind you see in slaughterhouses, swaying a little in the breeze. There was dried brown on them that I did not want to examine too closely. Jesus, Cole whispered. Guess we found somebody's hunting camp. It was not just the hooks, though. On the nearest tree, somebody had nailed up Polaroids. Dozens of them, overlapping, curling at the edges. Faces stared out from the faded squares. Men, women, kids. Some smiling like it was a party. Some looking like mugshots. A few of them had dates scribbled in pen on the white borders. Others just had a single letter. I stepped closer, my chest tight. I recognized one of the faces. A girl from the gas station 2 towns over, the one who had gone missing last year. Her photo from the "Have you seen me" poster had been all over the county. Here she was again, younger in a different shirt, hair pulled back. But it was her. This is not hunting, I said. My voice sounded small in that hollow. Could be somebody just collected news photos, Ray said, uncertainty all over his face. There are no headlines on these, I snapped. Look at the background. That is a house in daylight. Somebody took these themselves. The ridgeline above us went dark again, a smooth erase of the last bit of light. That is when we heard the engine. Not my truck. This was closer, sharper, a pickup grinding its way over rough ground from somewhere beyond the hollow. Headlights flashed through the trees for a second, then disappeared as whoever it was rounded a bend, hidden by brush. Shit, Cole hissed. Hide! We scattered without even discussing it. I dove behind one of the sagging tents, flattening myself into the damp earth. Cole slid in behind a log. Ray ducked behind the tree with the photos on it, which made my heart lurch because it put him too close to the center of camp. The truck pulled up just out of sight, engine idling. I heard doors slam. 2, maybe 3 voices, low and rough. The words not clear, but the tone unmistakable. Easy, like they were home. Boots crunched on leaves. The men came into view. They were not monsters in the way you see in movies. No ski masks, no dripping chainsaws. Just three middle-aged guys in hunting jackets, mud on their jeans, caps pulled low. One carried a rifle casually over his shoulder. The other two had something between them, a shape they dragged from the bed of the truck. At first I thought it was a deer. Then the shape moved. It was a person, hands bound behind their back, feet tied, a sack over the head. The body bucked once, a muffled sound trying to escape from under the fabric. One of the men kicked the struggling form in the ribs. "Easy now," he said. "You start hollering and you wake the whole damn mountain." They hauled the person over to the hooks. My fingers dug into the ground so hard I felt my nails bend. Every instinct I had screamed at me to jump up, to yell, to do something. But there were three of them, and three of us. And they had guns, and we had absolutely nothing. The woods suddenly felt as thin as paper between us. "You boys sure no one followed you from town?" Another voice asked. This one was deeper, a little breathless, like the man was heavier. "Ain't nobody coming up here," the first said. "Same as always." Same as always. Ray shifted his weight behind the photo tree. A twig snapped under his boot, loud as a gunshot in the suddenly quiet clearing. All three men froze. For a second, nobody moved. I held my breath so long my lungs burned. Then the man with the rifle swung it off his shoulder so fast I almost did not see him do it. "Who's there?" he barked. Silence. The bound person on the ground whimpered under the sack. "Thought you said nobody followed you," the heavier man said softly. No anger in his voice yet. That scared me more than if he had shouted. "All right," the rifleman said. "Come on out, slow, hands where I can see him. We can talk about this." Ray stayed behind the tree. I saw the rifle muzzle swivel toward my friend's hiding place. I saw the man's eyes narrow, tracking that one scrap of wrong in his camp. I could not feel my fingers anymore. The heavier man gestured to the others. "Sweep the tree line. If it is game, we eat. If it is not, we make it so it never went home." They split up. One came my way, boots sinking a little into the soft earth. I pressed myself flatter, biting my tongue to keep from making any sound. He passed within 10 feet of me. I could smell his sweat, the tang of cheap tobacco. On the other side of the clearing, the rifleman stepped around the photo tree. "There you are," he said. What happened next is in pieces in my head, like shards of glass. I remember Ray bolting, making a desperate run for the thicker brush. I remember the crack of the rifle and the way the sound bounced off the hollow walls. I remember something red on the leaves that was not from any deer. Cole and I ran. We did not shout to each other. We did not look back. We exploded out of our hiding spots and tore through the trees toward where we hoped the logging road was, branches whipping our faces, roots grabbing at our ankles. Behind us, someone hollered, another gunshot. Maybe it was a warning shot, maybe it was not. I did not care, I just ran. The ridge line ahead of us flickered. One moment it was just trees. The next it was a solid wall of black. For the third time that day, the mountaintop went dark in a single smooth motion, like an eyelid closing. The men behind us crashed through the undergrowth, cursing. Then their sounds grew distant, muffled, like someone had thrown a blanket over the world. My own footsteps sounded far away. I do not know how, but we made it back to the logging road. One moment we were half falling down a slope, grabbing saplings to keep from breaking our necks. and the next we were stumbling out onto gravel, my truck sitting there where we left it like something from another life. We did not speak until we were halfway back to town, hands shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. We did go to the sheriff. We told him what we saw, every ugly detail. He went up there with a couple deputies the next morning. He came back with a face like stone and told us they found a fire ring, some trash, and a couple old tarps, but no hooks, no photos, no truck tracks, no signs of our friend. "You boys sure you were not drinking?" he asked. "You sure Ray did not just wander off mad and go home a different way?" Ray's parents reported him missing. His truck stayed in their driveway. His dog cried at the door for days. They never found him. Sometimes I dream about that hollow. In the dream, I walk into the clearing, and the Polaroids are there again, fresh and bright. I go closer and see new faces tacked up alongside the old ones. In the corner of one picture, half turned away, is me. When the nightmares get real bad, I drive. I take the old logging road all the way to the gate, then sit there with the engine running, staring at the ridgeline. Most nights it just looks like trees against the sky. But twice now, when the light was failing, I saw it happen again. The whole line went dark from left to right, like something was moving along the top of the world, blotting out the day. I do not go past the gate anymore. I do not follow faint paths down into cool hollows. I stay where the maps say I am supposed to be. Believe what you want about ghosts and monsters. I am not here to convince you. I am only telling you that somewhere in those mountains, there are men who use the forest like a curtain, and something up on that ridge that helps them close it. And if you ever see the tree line go dark all at once, you turn around. You do not want to end up on that tree. My sister's voice did not come back to me as a ghost story. It came back as a wrong word. The first night I heard it, I was sitting on the low stone wall that separates our family graves from the tree line, tracing the dates on her headstone with my thumb. The sun had finished bleeding out behind the ridge, and that blue hour was creeping down the slope, one shadow at a time. Crickets, a few distant dogs, the soft clink of my mother washing dishes in our house up the hill. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Then, clear as if she was standing in the woods 3 feet away, I heard my sister say my name. Bella. That was normal. That was what she always called me. What was not normal was the breath that followed, like she was running, and the way the words stretched out into the trees. Bella. Help. My whole body locked up. I did not stand. I did not run. I just sat there on the stone and turned my head towards the dark line of trunks. When she disappeared, people from town said it was a man, a truck, a bad decision. They said it in low voices, and looked at my parents like we were already a funeral. The sheriff's report called it foul play suspected. The news mentioned the bloody shirt they found by the logging road, folded like laundry and left on the ditch bank. But there was always one small detail that did not fit the story they preferred to tell. The dogs never caught a scent that left the road. Every tracking hound they brought in circled, whined, and kept trying to pull back towards the trees. Like whatever had taken her had not driven away. Like it had walked. We buried an empty casket a year later, because you are supposed to. You are supposed to give grief a shape and a place. Her headstone sits closest to the woods, because she loved the trees, my mother said. I did not argue, but that was not why. It was because we all knew that if there was even one piece of her left anywhere in this world, it was out there, under those branches. Bella, the voice called again from the hollow. Softer this time. Please, If you have ever lost someone and then heard them where they could not possibly be, you will understand this part. There is a moment where your mind tries to put on brakes, to explain, to rationalize. Wind in the leaves, kids playing on the next road over, a memory bubbling up and spilling over into sound. And then there is your heart. That stupid old traitor, jumping at the chance to believe. I slid off the stone wall without remembering I had decided to move. My hand brushed the cold top of her headstone as I stepped into the grass. It felt like letting go of something that could never hold me back. The tree line was only 20 or 30 steps away. The ground dropped off quick into our family hollow, where the land dips and folds in on itself before climbing towards the ridge. When we were younger, my sister and I played there for hours, building forts out of deadfall and pretending the creek was a moat. My mother always shouted from the porch for us to be back before it got blue dark. That specific shade you only get in the mountains when the last light is still up on the ridges, but the hollows are already night. It was blue dark now. The ridge still glowed faintly. Under the trees, everything was already 2 shades closer to black. I did not bring a flashlight. I did not think to. "Where are you?" I called. My voice came out small, like I was 10 again. "Over here," the voice answered. It was further down the hollow, near where the old logging road used to cross the creek before it washed out. I fell. The words were right, but the rhythm was wrong. My sister always talked fast, stepping on the ends of her own sentences like she was late to finish them. This voice left space between each syllable, like it was tasting them. That bothered me enough that I stopped at the first big oak and put my hand on its trunk. The bark was rough and solid under my palm, a real thing in a place that suddenly did not feel real at all. "Say my middle name," I said. I do not know why that is what came out. Maybe because she used it to annoy me when we fought. Silence. Then a soft laugh, too low. "You are being stupid, Issa. Just come help me. My middle name is not Issa. It never has been." She knew that. She weaponized it. She would wait until my friends were around and then sing it like a song. The whole ridiculous 3-syllable thing my grandmother chose. My cheeks would burn and she would grin, and then we would wrestle on the living room floor until my mother yelled and my father separated us like puppies. If that had been her, she would have said it right, and she would have thrown it back in my face like she always did, because older sisters do not pass up a chance to embarrass you. My hand stayed on the oak. I realized, suddenly and with a kind of cold clarity, that I could not hear the house anymore. No dishes, no TV, no dogs. Even the crickets sounded like they had stepped back a few yards, as if they did not want to be too close to whatever was about to happen. "I cannot see you," I said. "Come closer." Branches shifted further down the hollow. Leaves rustled. It did not sound like one person moving. It sounded like several, all pushing against each other, all just out of sight. "Please," the voice said. "Please, it hurts." It had the right amount of breath in it, the right note of pain. It was trying very, very hard. "I am getting a flashlight," I heard myself say, and I stepped backward, hand still on the trunk, like that touch was the only thing keeping me anchored. The oak felt warmer now, like someone holding my palm from the other side of thick cloth. I did not want to let go. I did anyway. The moment I turned my back on the woods, the air changed. Not the temperature, that stayed cool, almost damp, but the pressure. It felt like being underwater and suddenly breaking the surface. Sounds rushed back. A car on the highway. My father's laugh from the porch. My mother's voice calling my name, faint but real. I walked, not ran, back up to the house. I told myself that if I ran, it meant I believed there was something to run from. Inside, my parents were at the kitchen table with a spread of bills and a pot of coffee between them. They both looked up when I came in. "You were out by her stone again," my mother said. Not a question. "Yeah," I answered. "I thought I heard—" I stopped. If I said it, it became a thing that existed outside my head. My father's jaw tightened. "You are not going in those woods at night alone," he said. That was all. I did not tell them that I already had, halfway. I did not tell them that the woods had spoken back. The second night, I did bring a flashlight. I waited until they were both asleep in front of the TV. The sound low, the blue glow painting their faces. I took the small mag light from the junk drawer and walked back down to the family plot. This time, I did not sit. I stood by her stone and waited. I did not have to wait long. "Bella," the voice called from the hollow, almost eager. "You came back." I switched on the flashlight and aimed it straight into the trees. The beam cut through one narrow slice of the dark, showing trunks and leaves and nothing else. "Where are you?" I asked. "By the old road," it said. I cannot move my legs. The old road had been washed out long before we were born. You could still find bits of it if you knew where to look. Chunks of crumbled asphalt, an old mile marker eaten by moss. My sister and I had used it as a landmark in our games. If the monster chased you past the marker, you were safe. Tonight, the idea of walking that far down there alone made my stomach turn. "Tell me what we buried with you," I said. Silence again, longer this time. Finally, the voice said, "Flowers." We had put flowers on the clothes lid, yes. But my father had sneaked something else in when he thought no one was looking. A small, ugly ceramic frog she had painted in second grade. It sat on her nightstand for years, staring with lopsided eyes at anyone who came into her room. He palmed it and slid it into the crook of the coffin like he was tucking her in one last time. The thing in the hollow did not know that. "You are not her," I said. My throat hurt. I realized I had been holding my breath. Leaves shivered. Something like a sigh moved through the trees, not from one direction, but from many. The voice, when it came back, was not trying as hard. "You want her?" it said. "That is enough." For a moment, the beam of my flashlight picked up something pale between the trunks. Not a face. Faces have features, angles, shadows. This was more like a cutout in the dark that the light did not quite penetrate, a shape standing where no tree grew, the size of a person in clothes that hung wrong on its frame. It stepped sideways. Just enough that I could see the gap it left behind was not the right shape either. I did not ask any more questions. I did not challenge it. I backed away, slow and careful, until my calves hit the stone wall. Then I turned and walked straight to the house, the beam shaking in my hand. That should have been the end of it. I should have stopped going down there at night. I should have told my parents. I should have done a lot of things. What I did instead was start listening. Over the next weeks, the voice changed. It switched between Bella and Isabella, sometimes dragging one out, sometimes chopping the other short, like it was trying on different fits. It started using phrases my sister actually used, things that made my chest ache. "Quit being dramatic. You are fine. Come on, do not be like that." At first, that made it worse. Then, it made it scarier. Because some of those phrases were not things she had said to me in front of the woods. She had said them in her room, door half closed, music playing low. She had said them into the phone, laughing. She had said them in the truck cab on the night she disappeared, when I refused to sneak out with her, and she called me a coward and told me I would regret being so boring. I had heard that last one because she left the window cracked, and her voice carried back into the house. If the thing in the hollow knew that tone, knew that cadence, it meant it had been listening for a long time. The last time I answered it was in late November, when the leaves were mostly down and the bones of the trees showed against the sky. The air had that brittle cold that makes sound travel further than it should. I stood at the edge of the plot, arms wrapped around myself, and listened to it call. Bella, I am cold. You're in the ground, I said. Whatever is out there is not you. You are wrong. The voice sounded almost annoyed now, like it was tired of playing. I am where you left me. I am where they folded me up. I am where the dogs turned away. It should not have known about the dogs. My mother never talked about that part. I stared into the dark until my eyes watered. Somewhere down in the hollow, a creek gurgled over rocks, the same way it always had. Somewhere further up, an owl called. Normal sounds. Safe sounds, if you did not know better. What do you want? I asked. The woods went quiet. I mean, truly quiet. The kind of silence that pushes in on your ears. When the answer came, it came from closer than it should have. I want you to come where I am, it said. They brought me here. You can walk. Something moved. Not down the hollow now, but up, towards the family plot. Dry leaves shifted, then stopped. I shone the flashlight and caught a glimpse of bare toes disappearing behind a tree, skin the color of riverstone. That broke whatever thin thread had kept me rooted there. I ran. I did not care about what running meant. I did not care about dignity or proof. I bolted for the porch, up the steps, through the door, and locked it behind me. My mother woke at the noise. I lied and said, I thought I saw a coyote. She told me to stay inside when it was dark. I promised I would. I have kept that promise. It has been 6 years. I go to her stone in daylight now. I bring flowers, and once, when nobody was looking, I brought a cheap ceramic frog I found at a yard sale that looked almost like the one she made. I set it on the grass and tucked it half under the headstone. It felt right. On certain nights, when the fog comes down from the ridge and sits low in the hollow, I stand at my bedroom window and listen. The sound carries up through the trees, thin and stretched, like it is coming from the bottom of a well. Sometimes it calls my name right. Sometimes it gets it wrong. Lately, it has started using words my sister never would have used. Older phrases, old names for the creek and the ridge that only my grandfather used to say. It is learning new tricks, or maybe it is getting bored with the old ones. People still ask me if I think she died that night by the road. If I think some man did what men like that do and then left her in a ditch somewhere the dogs missed. I tell them yes, because that is the story they can live with. The story I live with is different. I think something in those woods took what it could of her, the sound of her, the shape of her words, and kept them. I think it listened while we cried and prayed and shouted her name into the trees. I think it learned us like a language. And I think, on nights when the fog is thick and the hollow fills up with blue dark, it is still down there, practicing, waiting for someone else who misses someone enough to follow a familiar voice into the trees. If that is ever you, if you ever stand at the edge of the woods and hear the exact person you lost calling your name from where they cannot be, remember this. Real people cannot come back from where she went. But something else can walk to the edge and talk like them and it does not always get the words wrong. My grandfather used to say the roots know more names than the headstones ever will. He said it like a joke, rocking on that old porch swing, but he never laughed after. Just watched the tree line like it might answer back. I did not understand what he meant until the day I went looking for help under the laurel thickets. My name is Julian, and if you grow up poor in these mountains, you get used to the land taking things from you. Jobs, crops, sometimes people. What I was not prepared for was the land offering something back. It started with my mother's lungs. The doctor in town said words like idiopathic and progression and we will manage symptoms. But I heard what he did not say. There is a tone folks get when they are trying not to say, this is just going to get worse. I heard it every time he looked at her chart instead of her face. She could not climb the porch steps without stopping to catch her breath. I picked up every odd job I could, hauling, fixing, working nights at a warehouse an hour away. But the bills ate through my paychecks faster than I could stack them. I lay awake listening to her cough through the thin wall, counting the seconds between breaths like it might add up to a solution. That was when I started thinking about Granddad's stories. He used to talk about root men in the old days. Not witches, not exactly. Men who knew where the oldest roots surfaced, where the earth came closest to the skin of the world. Folks would go to them when they needed something the church could not give. Luck, healing, revenge. You paid in something that mattered, he said. The mountain does not take paper money. I always thought he meant it metaphorical. Old superstition to put a little spine into us when we talk too big. But after the third notice from the hospital and the second time my mother coughed so hard she almost blacked out at the kitchen table, metaphor did not feel like enough anymore. The first sign was on the fence. We have got a rotting stretch of rail along the back of our property line, where the posts lean like drunk old men and the wire sags halfway to the ground. One morning, walking back there to check for downed branches, I saw a mark carved into the gray wood. Not initials. Not the usual teenage nonsense. It was a circle with 3 lines dropping from the bottom like roots. I had seen that shape before, in Granddad's stories. He drew it in the dirt with his cane when he talked about the root men sign. The mark you left if you were willing to trade. There was a second mark cut into the weakest post, pointing downslope into the trees. Somebody could have been screwing with me. Kids with YouTube and too much time. But this was carved deep, with something sharp and patient, and nobody in our family had mentioned people on the land. Our nearest neighbor was a half-mile away and did not walk well enough to be carving signs on fences in the dark. I stared at that mark for a long time. Then I went back to the house, listened to my mother wheeze in her sleep, and made my decision. The path the mark pointed to was not a path, not at first, just a suggestion, a place where the undergrowth seemed to thin. The further I followed it, the more deliberate it looked. Blackberry canes arched away from my face. Roots that should have been ankle breakers lay flat enough underfoot that I did not trip. About 15 minutes down, the air changed. Cooler, wet like breath on glass. The trees opened into a clearing ringed with mountain laurel, their twisted branches forming something that felt too much like a doorway. In the center of the clearing, the roots of a great old oak had grown up and out of the ground, curling into shapes that looked almost like seats. Glass jars hung from the lower branches on twine, some empty, some filled with cloudy liquid, and things that looked like stones or teeth sunk at the bottom. Little bones lay half buried in the dirt, not animal small, not human big, something in between. I knew, without knowing how, that I had walked into a place people were not supposed to find on accident. "You are late," a voice said. It came from the shade beneath the oak. For a second, I thought it was just the wind moving through the jars, making them clink and hum. Then something stood up from the shadow. He looked like part of the tree at first. Bark-colored coat, pants the color of dirt, hat pulled low. Moss clung to his shoulders and sleeves like it had decided to grow there. His face was the only thing that was plain skin, and even that looked like it had been outside too long. "You have your granddaddy's walk," he said, heavy on the heel. I almost turned and left right then. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the creak I could hear somewhere under the laurel. But leaving would not fix my mother's lungs, and he knew that. I could see it in the way he watched me, like he was counting my options same as I was. "I need help," I said, because there was no point dressing it up. "My mama is sick." "All uphill from here," he replied. "Hospital, pills, prayers. You have done that road." "Yes." "Did not change the ending much, did it?" "No." He nodded, as if I had answered a test question correctly. "The roots can take some of the weight," he said. "They have before. But nothing leaves this ground empty-handed." He tapped his boot on the dirt between us. "You understand?" I thought about my life, about what I had to give. No money, no property worth mentioning. My own years did not feel like much of a bargaining chip. I would have thrown them into the fire gladly. "What do you want?" I asked. He smiled then, and his teeth were too even for a man who lived with moss on his coat. "Someone is already marked," he said. "Someone up on that ridge does not belong here. The mountain has been whispering their name through the roots for a while now, but it is not polite to take without an invitation." He tilted his head at me. "You give the roots leave to balance what should not be, and your mama breathes easier. That is the trade." My mouth went dry. "You are asking me to choose who dies?" He shrugged. "You think anybody up there cares who chokes on a ventilator in your little house? The mountain is older than their maps. It knows its own. It knows its strangers. It just needs a voice to say, 'Go on then.'" I thought of the tourists who came through in the fall, leaf peepers with their cameras and their loud voices. I thought of the pipeline men, the out-of-state plates on the trucks that carved scars into the hillsides. I thought of my mother's thin hands gripping the table when a coughing fit hit. "I do not know their names," I said. "The roots do," he replied. "You do not have to point." It was a coward's bargain, I knew that. If I said yes, someone whose face I did not know might slip on wet rock, or their brake line might fail on a sharp curve, or they might just wander off trail and never find their way back. I would never have to see their eyes go still. But I would see my mother climb the porch steps without stopping. I did not say the word yes. I just did not say no. The root man nodded like he had heard it anyway. He reached down, scooped up a handful of earth from between the oak's roots, and pressed it into my palm. It was cold, and something in it pulsed once against my skin. "Put that under her bed," he said. "By the headboard. Do not move the bed for 3 days. Do not ask the mountain who it takes. We do not discuss the other side of the ledger." I walked home with that dirt burning a hole in my hand. 2 days later, a hiker from out of state slipped near Buckthorn Ridge and fell into a ravine. The search and rescue team found him broken on the rocks at the bottom, long after the life had left him. People said it was a tragedy. The news mentioned how beautiful the view was and how dangerous it could be if you did not respect the edge. That same week, my mother's cough changed. It did not vanish, this is not a fairy tale, but it eased, She could make it up the porch steps without stopping. She could talk on the phone with my aunt without losing her breath every other sentence. When we went back to the doctor, he frowned at the scans and said words like unexpected stabilization and, "Madame, maybe we misjudged the progression." I did not tell him about the dirt under her bed, which had turned hard as stone when I slid it back out after 3 days. It looked like the kind of river rock you find deep in shaded creeks, worn smooth by time. Sometimes, when I am dead tired after a shift and the house is quiet, I swear I can hear something moving under the floorboards. A faint creak, like roots adjusting their grip. I tell myself it is just the house settling, old timber, old pipes. Then I remember the hiker's obituary. He had a name. He had a family up north who thought these mountains were just a weekend scenery change. They posted a picture of him smiling at some overlook from the year before. In the background of that photo, if you squint, you can see the faint line of our ridge. I have not gone back to the clearing since. But sometimes, when I walk the back fence, I run my fingers along the old posts. A few of them feel smoother now, like something has been rubbing against them from the inside of the wood. Maybe the roots do know more names than the headstones. Maybe one of those names is mine. Written somewhere under the laurel, waiting for the balance to tilt back. The mountain does not take paper money. It takes what you can live without until you realize you cannot. I lied to the police about what I saw on Switchback Road. I told them it was dark, that I was tired, that I must have misjudged the distance. That was the version they wrote down. The real version is the one that still watches me every night when I drive home from the hospital. My name is Hannah, and for 8 years I've worked nights as a nurse in a small Appalachian town where the mountains start right at the edge of the parking lot. The road I take home curls up and around those slopes. 3 tight switchbacks in a row with nothing but a low guardrail and a long drop between you and a forest that never seems to end. People warn each other about deer on that road, about black ice in winter, drunk drivers on weekends. Nobody warns you about the lights. It was a Tuesday in late November, the kind of cold that turns breath into smoke the moment you step outside. I had just finished a 12-hour shift on the medical floor, the kind where every room is full and every monitor alarm feels like it is wired directly into your spine. I remember rubbing the bridge of my nose as I started the car, feeling the ache behind my eyes, promising myself I would sleep straight through until dusk. The first switchback came and went like always. Guardrail, drop, a glimpse of the town lights below. I know that curve so well I could probably drive it with my eyes closed. It was on the second turn that I noticed them. At first, I thought they were deer eyes in the ditch. 2 bright points of reflected light just off the asphalt on the right, about where the embankment starts to slope. I eased off the gas, ready for the sudden panic of a deer bolting in front of me. Only, the eyes did not move. They did not blink either. I rolled closer, maybe 30 miles an hour, squinting through the windshield. As the car crept forward, more of them appeared between the trees above the ditch. 2 more, then 4, then 6. Each pair at the same height off the ground, all facing the road. It was like driving past a row of invisible people holding mirrors at head level. My headlights washed over them, and they stayed exactly the same. Steady, white-yellow points. Animal eyes flash and change as they catch the beam from different angles. These did not. A pressure settled in my chest. It felt like standing in a room where everyone has stopped talking at once. "Okay, no," I muttered. My voice sounded too loud in the car. I reached for the radio and got a mouthful of static. Not a song trying to come through, not the usual fading in and out from mountain interference. Just a solid sheet of white noise that swallowed the DJ mid-sentence. My phone, plugged into the charger, went from 50% to a black screen with a dead battery symbol in less than a minute. I told myself it was the cold, bad wires, bad luck. Anything but the thought that chewed at the back of my brain, that maybe whatever I was looking at did not want me calling anyone. As I hit the midpoint of the curve, the ditch on my right leveled out into a narrow stretch of flat ground. That is when I saw that the lights were not just by the roadside. They were up the slope too, in straight vertical lines between the trees. 2 by the ditch, 4 above them, 6 higher still, all perfectly spaced, like someone had drawn a grid on the mountain and pinned a pair of eyes at each intersection. They did not move. They did not blink. But I had the sickening impression that they were following my car, not by turning, but by somehow always being exactly where they needed to be, to look straight into my windshield. There is a moment when fear stops you from breathing. Mine hit right as the engine shuddered. The dashboard lights flickered. The car jerked once, twice, like it was going to stall. My foot instinctively slammed on the gas, stupid, I know, on a mountain curve. But the engine caught and roared a little louder, as if in protest. The steering felt sluggish, like I was pushing through water. "Keep going, keep going, keep going," I whispered to the wheel, like it could hear me. I did not look at the lights again. I kept my gaze on the double yellow line, on the tiny slice of asphalt illuminated ahead. Out of the corner of my eye, I could still feel them. Rows and rows of watching points, climbing the slope and maybe the opposite slope too, turning the whole hollow into a kind of corridor. When I finally rounded the bend and hit the straight stretch that leads toward the third switchback, the radio snapped back to life mid-song. My phone screen lit up with a charging symbol like nothing had happened. The engine smoothed out. The air in my chest loosened. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had half convinced myself exhaustion had turned deer into demons. 2 days later, my co-worker Carla did not show up for our shift. Carla is not the type to no call, no show. She texted if she was going to be 5 minutes late. When the charge nurse called her phone, it went straight to voicemail. Her husband had not seen her since she left for night shift the evening before. She drove the same road I did. The sheriff's deputies found her car on the second switchback, nose against the guardrail, driver's side door open. No skid marks, no sign of impact. Her purse still in the passenger seat, her phone dead on the floor mat. They searched the woods for 3 days. Dogs, volunteers, the whole small town swarm of people who care, because it might be them next. They did not find a body. They did not find her shoes. They did not find anything but some broken twigs leading a few yards into the trees before they just stopped. When they asked me, in a cramped interview room that smelled like old coffee, if I had noticed anything strange on that road that week, I had a choice. I could tell them about the lights. I could tell them about the radio dying, about the feeling of being watched by something that did not need to move to follow you. I could watch the skepticism slide over their faces as they wrote that down and decided I was tired, stressed, maybe in need of a wellness check myself. Or I could be the sensible night shift nurse who knew better than to bring ghost stories into a missing person case. I did not see anything, I said. It was just another night. One of the deputies, a man I went to high school with, gave me a look like he knew I was holding something back. I met his eyes and held the lie steady until he looked away. The thing about lying is that it does not erase what happened. It just relocates the weight. I carried it with me every shift after that. Every time I glanced at the clock and calculated how dark the mountain would be when I drove home. A week later, the sheriff brought me into his office. He closed the door, which he never does, and set a laptop on the desk between us. "We pulled this off Carla's dash cam before the battery died," he said. "I want you to tell me what you see." The footage was dark and grainy, the way cheap cameras always are. I recognized the curve by the angle of the guardrail, the shape of the trees. Headlights swept the ditch, the embankment, the slope. Then they touched the first pair of lights. On video, they were washed out white points, blown slightly by the glare. No color, no weight. But as the car moved, the headlights caught more. 2, 4, 6. Exactly where I remembered them. Exactly in those same neat lines. Up the slope, between the trunks. Like someone had installed rows of reflectors in a place where no human had bothered to put even a warning sign. There were no bodies, no shapes, just the lights, unwavering. At the moment where my radio had died, Carla's did too. The audio cut to a flat hum. The timestamp at the bottom of the screen slowed for a second, the seconds ticking over too hesitantly, as if the device itself did not want to mark time in that stretch. "Could be lens flare," the sheriff said. "Could be," I answered. He watched my face more than the screen. "You sure you did not see anything out there, Hannah?" I swallowed. My tongue felt too big in my mouth. "I saw what you saw," I said carefully. "Light doing something I do not understand." He accepted that, wrote something down, closed the laptop. Later, the footage corrupted. That is what they told the news when people asked why it was not being used to help find her. The copy I saw was the only one that came out clean. Or maybe that is what I tell myself. So I do not have to imagine whoever, or whatever, was behind those lights watching itself on replay. It has been a year. Carla's husband moved away. Her case file sits somewhere in a drawer under the heading, "Missing Presumed Dead." The road did not change. The curves still snake up the mountain. The guardrail still shimmers in my headlights. Deer still dart across when you least want them to. The lights are still there. They do not show up every night. Sometimes weeks go by where that stretch is nothing but darkness and the usual reflectors. But then, on a random Tuesday or a foggy Friday, they appear again in my peripheral vision, already arranged, already waiting before my car even reaches the bend. I tried another route for a while, a longer way home that added 20 minutes to an exhausted commute. The third night, a rock slide closed it off. A week later, black ice spun me halfway around on a supposedly safer road. I ended up back on switchback without meaning to, hands sweating on the wheel, heart punching my ribs. Now, I drive it every night. I keep the radio off. I keep my phone face down. When the lights appear, I do not stare at them. I let them sit at the edge of my vision like lines of spectators at a race I never signed up for. Here is the part I have not told anyone. They are getting closer. At first, they stayed on that second switchback, lined up nice and tidy along the embankment. Now, once or twice, I have seen a pair much earlier on the road, in a patch of trees that never used to hold anything but shadow. A month ago, one single pair appeared at the edge of the hospital parking lot, high up in the tree line, gone when I blinked, but leaving me cold all the same. Maybe I lied to the police because I did not think anybody could help. Maybe I lied because I was afraid they would believe me and decide I was the one who needed locking up. Or maybe I lied because the moment I told the truth out loud, whatever is lining that mountain with eyes would know my name the way I know Carla's. And I am not ready to feel that many lights turn, all at once, to look straight at me. If you ever drive Switchback Road at night and your radio dies for no reason, do yourself a favor. Do not slow down to see what is watching you. Some things in these mountains do not chase. They do not need to. They just stand in the dark, and sooner or later, you come to them. If you pause the footage right at the 9-minute mark, you can see the window I am talking about. Look close at the top right corner. There should not be a second story on that cabin, but there it is. Glass reflecting a light that is not ours. My name is Marcus, and I used to run a tiny YouTube channel with 2 friends, the kind that does urban exploration on places that are not really urban and definitely should not be explored. We specialized in Appalachia deep woods challenges, hiking to old mine ruins, forgotten cemeteries, bootlegger sites, clickable titles, scary thumbnails, lots of shaky night vision. It was dumb and reckless, and for a while, the most alive I ever felt. The cabin changed that. The legend was simple. There was a hunter's cabin somewhere off Crooked Branch Hollow that only appeared if you got lost. People swore they had stumbled on it after wandering in circles, staying the night there and waking up to find nothing but trees where the door should have been. Great for a video, right? A cabin that does not exist. We planned it like we always did. 3 of us, me, Tyler, and Nate. 2 cameras, spare batteries, GPS on our phones, compass, printed topo map. We would hike off the marked trail, deliberately ignore the map after a point, and see if anything weird happened. Worst case, we get lost for a bit, camp, and hike out in the morning with a spooky story about strange sounds for the viewers. From the start, the woods did not feel right. The compass needle spun in slow circles like it had lost the idea of north. The GPS location on my phone jumped 50 yards at a time, dropping our blue dot in places where there was no trail at all, then snapping back. We laughed it off, called it classic horror movie vibes, and kept going. After a couple hours, the trees started to repeat. I do not mean they all looked the same, so it felt repetitive. I mean we kept passing the same crooked birch with a lightning scar in its trunk, the same 3 stones clustered like knuckles on the ground, the same fallen log with a notch that looked like a bite out of it. Tyler picked up a crushed beer can and put it in his pack. 20 minutes later, we stepped over that exact same can in the exact same position. "We are looping," Nate said. "We must be circling something." Right after he said that, we saw the chimney. It poked up through the tree line ahead of us, made of dark stone that did not match any rock around. As we pushed through the undergrowth, the rest of the cabin came into view. A steep roof, gray boards, a crooked porch. No path leading to it, no cleared ground around it. Just the structure sitting in a bowl of trees like it had grown there. Tyler whooped, all exhaustion gone. "We actually found it. Dude, this thumbnail is going to slap." We filmed everything, like always. Wide shot, close-ups, me doing our usual intro about found footage in the real deep woods of Appalachia. The cabin looked old but not rotten. The boards were weathered but solid, windows unbroken, doors shut and slightly warped in its frame. Someone had carved shapes into the porch rail, little X's and circles, a few stick figure men with no heads. "Ready?" Tyler asked, his hand on the door latch. Camera pointed at his own face for dramatic effect. The footage we uploaded later cuts right there. One frame of his hand on the latch, then jump. Suddenly, we are all inside. Dust motes in the air, our flashlights swinging around bare walls. But that is not how I remember it. In my memory, the door stuck. We had to shoulder it open together. When it finally gave, it did not swing into a small one-room cabin like the footage shows. It opened onto a hallway that should not have fit inside, long and narrow, with doorways on either side. The air smelled like earth and something chemical, sharp enough to sting my nose. I remember a set of stairs at the far end, going down instead of up. Treads worn in the middle, as if many feet had used them. Tyler laughed and said, "Basement episode, let's go," and clattered down with his camera. Nate followed. I stayed at the top of the stairs for a few seconds, filming the jars on a shelf by the wall. They were lined up neatly, all the same size, lids rusted. Something pale and cloudy floated in each one, turning slowly like it was trying to face the light. I did not want to think about what it was. "Marcus, you seeing this?" Tyler called up. His voice sounded further away than it should have, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. I put my foot on the first step, and then I was outside. No transition, no stumble, no cut in my memory. 1 second, my weight was tipping forward into that stairwell. The next second, my boots were on dead leaves, and I was standing 10 feet from the cabin, camera in my hand, pointing at the front door. Tyler and Nate were next to me, breathing hard like they had been running. The sun had shifted, shadows were longer. My watch said we had been there for nearly 3 hours, but the footage on my camera, from the moment we first touched the door to that moment outside, amounted to 14 minutes and change. "Did you just lose time?" Nate asked quietly. Tyler ignored the question, already slipping into performance mode. "We are getting the hell out of here," he said into his lens, voice shaking just enough to sell it. "Something is not right. We are going back to camp." We backed away from the cabin without turning our backs on it, the way you do with a dog you do not trust. As the trees thickened between us, I saw movement in the upper window. A flicker, like someone stepping aside just as I tried to get a clear look. On the hike out, we kept tripping over places we had not seen before. A creek, a rock outcrop. But somehow they all led us downhill, towards the logging road. The compass started working again a half mile from the truck. GPS snapped back to the trail. We made stupid jokes about glitches in the matrix to cover the fact that all three of us were shaking. That night, in my apartment, I loaded the footage onto my laptop. Every time someone stepped toward the cabin door, the video skipped. Little jumps forward, Tyler reaching for the latch, then all of us already inside. Me lifting my camera toward the stairwell, then a smear of motion, and we are outside again. No hallway, no basement, no jars. I called Nate. He had the same gaps on his camera. Tyler's files were identical. "Maybe we just freaked ourselves out," he said. "Maybe there was no basement. We got in, saw it was nothing, left." "Then why can I picture the stairs?" Nate whispered. "Why do I remember someone down there knocking from inside the walls?" Tyler stopped answering our group chat a week later. His roommate found him in their bathroom, pills scattered on the tile, music still playing in the living room. The note he left did not mention the cabin. It did mention not being able to sleep because something under the floor kept knocking, always 3 times, always just as he was drifting off. After the funeral, I deleted the cabin footage from my hard drive, or I tried to. The progress bar stalled at 99% and then vanished. The files were gone when I checked the folder. I emptied the recycle bin. I smashed the SD card with a hammer for good measure. 2 months later, during a thunderstorm, my TV turned itself on at 3 in the morning. The screen stayed black for a second, then flickered to a paused image. Frame 9 minutes and 3 seconds. Timestamp burned into the corner. The cabin window, upper right. A reflection in the glass that might have been trees, or might have been a face turned away. I unplugged the TV from the wall. The picture stayed for a full 3 seconds before it blinked out. The channel is dead now. No more uploads, no more deep woods challenges. People in the comments still ask what happened to us, why we stopped right when the views were finally climbing. I let them make up their own stories. Copyright claim, demon, creative burnout. This is the version I do not post anywhere. If there is one thing I learned from that cabin, it is that not all empty places are truly empty, and not everything that happens to you wants to be recorded. Some things bend your memories and your footage to match whatever shape they want. Whatever we walked into up there let us leave, in a way. It let us keep enough to be scared. It took enough to make sure we could never prove any of it. And sometimes, when storms roll over the ridge and the lights flicker, I get the sick feeling that the cabin is closer than it was. Like the woods rearrange themselves a little to bring it nearer to town. If your screen ever freezes on an image of a window you do not recognize, and you swear you never filmed it, do yourself a favor. Do not hit play. Here is a little test you can do if you ever move to a hollow in these mountains. Pull up your house on a map app and drop a pin. Screenshot it. Then, 6 months later, check if the pin still lines up with where your front door feels like it is. My name is Patrick, and the last time I checked, my cabin was not on any map anymore. After my marriage fell apart, I wanted 3 things: quiet, distance, and cheap rent. A guy at the hospital told me about a place his cousin owned way out past the old strip mine. A 1-bedroom cabin that sat at the end of a rutted lane, surrounded by trees and nothing else. It is perfect if you do not mind being alone, he said. You will hear your own heartbeat out there. That sounded like heaven. The first night it was. No traffic, no upstairs neighbors stomping around, no ex-wife's voice bleeding through the walls. Just rain on the metal roof and the occasional low hoot of an owl. I unpacked slowly, set up my laptop on the little kitchen table, and told myself this was where I would rebuild. The cabin itself was nothing special. One big main room with a stove and sink at one end, a couch and wood stove at the other. Small bedroom off the side, bathroom with questionable plumbing. It had that musty, shut up for a few seasons smell. But a day of open windows and a scrub brush took care of most of it. The woods around it were what sold me. Thick oaks and poplar, laurel higher up, mossy rocks. A narrow, faint trail led downhill toward a creek. On the second day, I followed it for an hour, then came back and fell asleep on the couch with the door open, breeze moving the curtains like slow breaths. The first strange thing was small, easy to ignore. I hung my keys on a nail by the door, went to shower, came back, and found them on the table. I assumed I misremembered. A week later, I set my coffee mug on the counter, turned to grab my bag, turned back, and the mug was already on the table by the laptop. Where I was headed, where I would have put it. You are losing it, man, I told my reflection in the bathroom mirror that night. Sleep more. I slept. The cabin did not. About 3 weeks in, I started hearing footsteps on the porch late at night. Not the heavy clomp of a person in boots, more like bare feet, quick and light, pacing from one end of the boards to the other. Every time I got up to look, the sound stopped. I would open the door to nothing but cold air and trees. One night around 2 in the morning, the pacing stopped right outside the door, and I heard a soft, breathy chuckle, like someone amused with themselves. I did not open the door that time. I sat on the couch, every light on, and waited until dawn turned the windows gray. I told myself it was raccoons, foxes, coyotes, anything but the mental image of a person standing there, ear pressed to the wood. The cabin got helpful after that. I would think about making coffee, and when I walked into the kitchen, The kettle would already be sitting on the burner, lid off. I had no memory of taking it out. I would reach for a book I wanted to reread, and it would already be laying on the arm of the couch instead of on the shelf. Once, I came home from the store, arms full of groceries, and the chair at the table was already pulled back, angled toward the window where I like to sit. At first, I appreciated it. Who would not want a house that anticipates you? I chalked it up to routine, to my own muscle memory. Maybe I set those things up and just forgot. Long shifts, stress, easy explanation. Then it started anticipating things I had not done before. On a rainy Saturday, I sat on the couch scrolling on my phone, feeling restless. I thought, completely idly, that I should rearrange the furniture so the couch faced the wood stove instead of the window. I did not stand up. I did not move a thing. I just imagined it, the way you think. I should paint that wall someday. I fell asleep like that. When I woke up, the couch had moved. The coffee table, too. The whole seating area had rotated 90 degrees to face the stove. My books that had been stacked on the floor were neatly lined up along the wall by the new orientation. There were faint drag marks in the wood and a scuff on the rug, as if something had nudged and tugged and gotten everything just so. I checked the door. Still locked from the inside. Windows latched. No muddy footprints. No sign of anyone else. It felt, all at once, like waking up in someone else's house. I should have left then. Called my buddy and begged his couch for a while. Instead, I laughed too hard, the sound bouncing off the low ceiling. "Okay, haunted house," I said out loud. "I get it. You are quirky." Talking to it made it worse. The more I acknowledged it, the bolder it got. I would mutter, I should go for a walk. And 10 minutes later, when I stepped outside, there would be a faint, newly trodden path leading off to the left where there had not been one before. Grass bent, leaves disturbed. If I followed it, it would take me somewhere I had never seen. A little pool tucked between rocks, a hollow full of ferns. A view of the hollow I did not know existed. I never saw anyone else on those paths. I never saw any sign of boots, just my own prints if I doubled back. The footsteps at night changed. Instead of pacing, whatever it was started circling the cabin. Tap, tap on one wall, then the next, then the back. Always the same pattern. 4 sides, 2 taps per wall, a slow orbit. One evening, after a long, bad day at work, I came home angry. The hospital had cut hours, my ex had texted something venomous, and my brain would not shut up. As I unlocked the door, I thought. Not said, just thought. I wish I did not have to go back out there. I wish I could just stay here and let the world handle itself. The words had barely finished forming in my head when something answered from the far corner of the main room. "You can." The voice was mine. It sounded exactly like me, down to the lazy drawl I hate hearing on recordings. It came from the darker patch near the wood stove, where the light from the kitchen did not quite reach. I could not see anything there but shadow and the outline of the chair. Every hair on my arms rose. My own voice echoed in my ears, something wrong in the timing, like the cabin had needed half a second to process the sentence before speaking. I did not say anything back. I walked to the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed until my heartbeat slowed. Through the wall, I heard the soft scrape of wood on wood, as if a chair was being turned to face the door. After that, I started trying to prove to myself that it was all in my head. First, the map. I pulled up my address on my phone, dropped a pin on the cabin, and saved the screenshot. Pin right at the end of the lane, where the roof showed through the trees. 2 months later, after a string of nights where the tapping never stopped, not just 4 walls once, but loops over and over until dawn, I checked again. The satellite image still showed trees, the faint lighter square of the roof. But when I dropped the pin on where I knew the cabin sat, the app snapped it back up the lane to the old trailer lot near the road. No matter how I tried, the map would not let me say, here. It only accepted, near here. Then the mail changed. My bills started coming addressed to just the route and box number, no street name. Packages got delayed because address not found. The power company called to ask if I had moved. Their system kept flagging my meter as inactive location. When I gave directions over the phone, the woman on the line said, "Our map does not show anything past the cul-de-sac, sir." There is no cul-de-sac on that road. Just the lane, and beyond it, my cabin. On my last night there, I woke up to silence. No tapping, no footsteps, no wind. The kind of silence you get right before something heavy falls. My bedroom door was open a crack. Through it, I could see the main room, lit dimly by the coals in the wood stove. The chair by the window was turned toward my room, not angled slightly, not off by a degree. Fully, perfectly aligned with the doorway, as if someone had been sitting there, staring at me sleep. I sat up. The mattress sighed. From the chair, I heard my own voice again, soft and almost gentle. "Stay," it said. "You do not have to go back." I did not argue. I did not obey either. I stood, grabbed the duffel I had never quite finished unpacking, and walked out. I did not turn off lights. I did not lock the door. I did not look at the chair. Outside, the woods felt closer to the cabin than they had when I moved in. Trees leaning in, branches almost brushing the porch rail. At the end of the lane, where gravel meets paved road, I stopped and looked back. The trees were just a thick, black wall. No cabin roof, no glint of glass. For a second, I had the insane thought that if I walked back up, there would be nothing there. Just the imprint of a foundation in the dirt. That if I opened my photos on my phone, every picture I took inside would be blurry, the background smudged like a thumb had been dragged across reality. I did not test it. I got in the car and drove. In town, my address works. Maps know the street. The mail arrives on time. At night, in my new apartment with neighbors above and below, I still hear footsteps sometimes. But they are ordinary human ones, irritating but harmless. Every once in a while, someone mentions that old hollow and how there used to be a cabin back there. Years ago, before the road washed out. They say it burned down. They say it was condemned. They say it never passed inspection. Stories change depending on who is talking. I do not correct them. If you ever find a place that seems to like you a little too much, that anticipates you before you act, that makes it easier and easier to stay inside and harder to leave, do yourself a favor. Check the map. Drop a pin. And if one day it refuses to stick exactly where your front door is, understand that the place you call home may have decided you are not a visitor anymore. You are inventory. I was 8 years old the first time I watched a man disappear into a wall that did not exist. Back then, the new multiplex just off the highway was the pride of our little Appalachian town. 8 whole screens, neon lights, a lobby that smelled like butter and sugar and cold air conditioning. My mother called it the city in a box. For me, it was magic. Cartoons 10 feet tall, sodas as big as my head. The bathrooms were down a long corridor off the main lobby, past the poster frames and the arcade machines. On Saturday afternoons, That hallway was a river of kids and parents and teenagers trying to look bored. My mother did not like crowds, so she always sent me ahead with, "You know the way, Eli. I will be right here when you get back." That day, the line at the women's restroom was wrapped halfway around the corner. She gave me a strained smile and waved me toward the men's, which was empty except for one stall door closed and a man washing his hands at the sink. He was the first thing that felt off. Not because he looked scary. He did not. He wore a brown coat, the kind my grandfather wore to church, and a flat cap. His hair was neatly trimmed. His shoes were polished. He could have been anybody's uncle or neighbor. But he was not moving quite right. His hands were under the running water, but he was not rubbing them together. Just holding them there, fingers spread, staring at his own reflection. The tap was on full, splashing, going nowhere. From where I stood, I could see his mouth in the mirror. It was open just a bit, like he was caught halfway between words and had forgotten the rest of the sentence. I did what any 8-year-old boy intent on proving he was not scared of public bathrooms would do. I walked past him to the urinal, stared at the tiles, and pretended I did not notice him at all. He did not look at me, did not shift, did not turn off the tap. When I finished, I went to the sink furthest from him and washed my hands, quick and perfunctory. The water coming out of my faucet was warm. The water from his was ice cold. I could feel it from half the counter away, a chill radiating off the stream. That is when I realized there was no sound coming from his sink. Mine gushed and echoed. His poured in silence. The hairs on my arms lifted. I dried my hands on my jeans and turned to leave. As I reached the door, he spoke. "Do you know where Theater 9 is?" he asked, in a voice that sounded like someone had pulled it up from the bottom of a well. Slow, thick, every syllable a little delayed. I stopped with my hand on the push bar. "It is down the hall on the right," I said, pointing back the way I came. "The numbers are on the doors." He did not look at the door, did not look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the mirror. "They moved it," he said. "It used to be different." I did not know what to say to that. I was 8. Theater 9 might as well have been the moon to me. I mumbled, "My mom is waiting," and pushed through the door. The hallway outside was full of people. Families, clumps of teenagers, a couple of old ladies with popcorn tubs clutched in bony hands. Normal Saturday crowd. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The carpet pattern stung my eyes. I stood there, heart beating too fast, and told myself I was being stupid. A weird man in a bathroom, that was all. Plenty of those in the world. My mother would have told me not to talk to him at all. I took 3 steps away from the door. Then, for reasons I have never been able to explain properly, I turned back and pushed it open again. The bathroom was empty. The sink where the man had stood was dry. No puddle, no dripping tap. The mirror was clear, no smear where his breath had fogged it. The stall door at the end was still closed. I called out a tentative, "Hello?" My voice bounced off tile and porcelain and came back smaller. The stall door creaked. My heart jumped into my throat. For a second, I pictured him stepping out. Face wrong, eyes too wide. Instead, the door swung inward on its own, bumping the partition. The stall was empty. Toilet seat up. No feet, no shoes, no shadow. I backed out again, this time not looking away until I was in the hallway with the noise and the people and the smell of popcorn. I did not tell my mother. Not then. I was afraid she would be mad that I had talked to a stranger. Afraid she would laugh, afraid she would tell me I had imagined it, and I would have to choose between believing her and believing my own eyes. So I kept it, a little knot of wrongness in the back of my head. Years went by. We kept going to that theater. I avoided that restroom when I could. When I could not, I rushed in and out, refusing to look too long at the mirrors. By the time I was in high school, the multiplex had stopped being shiny. The carpets were stained. The neon flickered. Everyone talked about the newer place 2 towns over with reclining seats. Our theater was where you went if you did not have gas money. One night, home from college and bored, I ended up in the kitchen listening to my dad and uncle talk about how this town has changed. It was the usual list. Factories closed, kids leaving, Main Street dying. Then my uncle said, "You remember when that theater first opened? Folks acted like it was the second coming." My dad snorted. "They built it on a lie to begin with." "How so?" I asked, happy for any distraction from their litany of complaints. "They screwed up the blueprints," he said. "There was supposed to be a whole other hallway on the back side. Extra 2 screens, more bathrooms, storage. Got halfway through framing before they realized the ground back there was too unstable. Old coal seam under it or something. They had to tear it out and seal the wall. Whole thing cost a fortune." My uncle nodded. "City inspector said they should have never dug there. Said it was like the mountain did not want a door in that spot." "Where was it?" I asked, my skin already prickling. "Behind where the arcade is now," Dad said. "Long hall they bricked over. You can still see where the floor plan does not make sense if you really look." Later that week, I went back to the theater with a couple of friends to see some horror sequel, Habit More Than Desire. While they bought snacks, I walked down the bathroom corridor alone. The hallway felt narrower than I remembered. The men's room door was in the same place, the same scuffed metal plate at the bottom. Across from it, the wall where the poster frames hung had a long, slightly raised seam running down the length of it. Painted over but visible if you knew to look. A faint, vertical line, like a healed scar. I stepped up to it and laid my palm flat. The wall felt hollow is the only word I have. Not empty, not exactly, but wrong for where it should be solid. My hand tingled. Behind me, the bathroom door opened. A man in a brown coat and flat cap stepped out, head down, moving slowly. For half a second, my heart stopped. Then he turned toward me, and I saw his face clearly in the hallway light. Different man, same clothes. Just a coincidence. That is what I told myself as he brushed past, smelling of aftershave and popcorn butter. He walked down the hall, then stopped right where that barely visible seam met the side wall. He frowned, reached out as if to push on air, and his hand met plaster instead. He stared at it, confused, like he had expected there to be a gap. Used to be different. He muttered, almost exactly the way the man in my memory had. I did not say anything to him. He shook his head, blinked like someone waking up, and went toward the lobby. That night, I dreamed of the bathroom as it should have been, with a second corridor leading past it. In the dream, I stood where the seam in the wall is and watched people walking down that other hall. Families, kids, older couples holding hands. They were all slightly faded, as if seen through old glass. None of them looked back at me. At the end of the hall in the dream was a door marked Theater 9. The number was the same as our real Theater 9, but the font was older, more ornate. Light leaked around the frame, flickering like projector glow. I could hear something on the other side. A soundtrack, maybe. But the low undercurrent did not sound like any movie I had heard. It sounded hungry. In the dream, I reached for the handle. Before I could touch it, something from the other side moved closer to the crack, pressing against the door. The frame swelled, wood groaning. A breath of air pushed through, smelling like old coal and cold water and 1,000 people's exhalations trapped with nowhere to go. I woke up with my hand outstretched, fingers curled around nothing. I do not go to that theater much anymore. Life took me to bigger towns with newer screens. But whenever I visit home and drive past, I look at the back of the building where the hill slopes up against it. If you look closely, you can see where the addition would have been, the hump in the earth that covers what they tore out. They say the ground back there is too unstable to build on, that there are old tunnels underneath from mines nobody mapped properly, that if you dig, the earth caves in. I sometimes wonder if, under all that dirt and concrete, there is still a corridor, still a door marked Theater 9 in a font nobody uses anymore, still a bathroom where a man stands, hands under silent water, waiting for someone to tell him the way to a place that no longer exists. And I wonder, if the mountain did not want a door there, what exactly it was trying to keep in or out. If you ever find yourself in a building where the floor plan does not make sense, where a wall feels hollow under your palm and your reflection in the bathroom mirror seems too still, remember this: not every door that was built stayed open, and not every place that is gone on paper is gone in truth. Somewhere, just a few inches and a few bad decisions away, there might still be a hallway full of people walking toward a movie that never ends.